Sir, my daughter has your exact tattoo. The old woman's voice didn't shake. It didn't beg. It simply landed in the middle of that diner like a stone dropped into still water, and every single person in the room felt the ripple. Ryder Callahan stopped walking. 6 feet 230 pounds of road-worn leather and consequence, and he stopped like he'd hit a wall. The silence that followed wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind that meant something. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when the past reaches out and grabs a man by the throat in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, this is that story. Subscribe to this channel right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The Painted Spur Diner sat 11 miles outside of Flagstaff on a stretch of Route 89 that the highway department had half forgotten and God had completely ignored. It was the kind of place that existed because people needed to exist somewhere. Truckers running long hauls through the high desert, retirees in dusty sedans making slow pilgrimages to see grandchildren, the occasional tourist who'd taken a wrong turn and decided to make peace with it. The coffee was strong and the pie was real, and nobody asked questions about where you were headed or where you'd been. It was by every measure the last place anyone expected anything to happen. But things have a way of happening in last places. That's almost the whole point of them. Maggie Whitmore had been sitting in the corner booth for the better part of an hour, nursing her third cup of coffee and working through the crossword puzzle in the back of a magazine she'd bought at a gas station 2 states ago. She was 71 years old with white blonde hair she still set in rollers every Tuesday night, reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck, and the kind of calm that comes not from the absence of hard experience, but from having survived enough of it to know that panic had never once solved a single problem in her life. She heard the motorcycles before the door opened. Everyone did. 6 engines, heavy ones. The kind of sound that gets inside your chest and vibrates something primal and old. The other customers, a trucker at the counter, 2 young women sharing a basket of fries by the window, an older couple eating quietly near the register, all went still in their own way. Not dramatically. Just that small instinctive tightening that humans do when their nervous systems register incoming information that requires assessment. The door opened and the first man through was tall, gray-haired, with a trimmed beard and forearms that told the story of a life lived in the open air. His leather vest was black, and across the back of it, in letters that didn't leave room for interpretation, were 3 words that had meant something on American roads for 7 decades. HELLS Angels. He was followed by 5 more. Different ages, different faces, same vests, same unhurried way of moving that men develop when they've stopped being afraid of most things. They walked to the center of the diner and paused, scanning the room, not with aggression, but with the automatic assessment of people accustomed to reading spaces quickly. The young women by the window stopped talking mid-sentence. The trucker at the counter developed a sudden and intense interest in his coffee mug. The older couple near the register became very still, the way people become still when they're trying to decide whether to be invisible. The waitress, a heavy-set woman named Darlene who had worked that counter for 19 years and believed she had seen everything, took one look at the vests and took one involuntary step backward before catching herself and holding her ground. The silence was total, the kind of silence that has weight. And then from the corner booth, a calm voice said, "Sir." Ryder Callahan turned toward the sound. Maggie Whitmore had not set down her crossword. She had not removed her reading glasses. She looked at him over the top of the lenses with the steady, unhurried gaze of a woman who had raised children and buried a husband and driven 1,700 miles alone and was not under any circumstances going to be rattled by the living room going quiet. "My daughter has your exact tattoo," she said. The room did not breathe. Ryder stood absolutely motionless. The men behind him shifted almost imperceptibly, not toward threat, but toward attention, the way a group of people shift when something unexpected happens to someone they follow and they're waiting to understand what it means. On the inside of Ryder's left forearm, just below the crook of his elbow, was a tattoo that had been there for 12 years. Most people who saw it assumed it was decoration, a compass rose with a particular modification, a single word written inside the north-pointing needle, in letters too small to read from a distance. It was not decoration. It had never been decoration. And in 12 years, no one outside his own circle had ever referenced it directly, unprompted, without context. He looked at the old woman for a long moment. "Say that again," he said. His voice was quiet, not threatening, Just careful. My daughter Maggie said with exactly the same tone she'd used the first time, has your exact tattoo. Same place, same design, same word in the center. She paused. I've been looking at it on her arm for 12 years and wondering what it meant. I always figured she'd tell me when she was ready. Another pause. She hasn't been ready. Right across the room. Not quickly, not slowly, with the deliberate measured pace of a man who has learned that how you move tells people everything about whether they need to be afraid of you, and who was currently working very hard to make sure this particular old woman understood that she did not. He stopped at the edge of her booth and looked down at her. She looked up at him. What's your daughter's name? He asked. Sarah, Maggie said. Sarah Whitmore. She's a nurse. She tilted her head slightly. Or she was. She's been driving. She called me this morning from somewhere past Kingman. Said her car was giving her trouble. She set the crossword magazine down on the table with a soft sound and folded her hands on top of it. I haven't heard from her since. Something crossed Ryder Callahan's face. Not many people would have caught it. The men behind him caught it. His second, a broad-shouldered man named Cole, took 2 steps forward without being asked. Ryder, he said quietly. I heard her, Ryder said. He did not take his eyes off Maggie. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, and his voice had changed now. Not softer exactly, but more careful. The way a man gets careful when he understands that what he's handling matters. I need you to tell me everything she said. Where she was, what direction she was heading, what was wrong with the car. Everything, exactly as she said it. Maggie looked at him for another moment. She was assessing him. He could feel it. She was an old woman who knew how to read people, and she was reading him right now. With the same calm attention she'd been giving her crossword, and he held still and let her do it. She said the engine light came on, Maggie said. She pulled over about 15 miles east of Kingman on Route 66, the old stretch, not the interstate. She said there was no signal, and she was going to try to flag someone down. A pause. That was 4 hours ago. 4 hours. Old Route 66 east of Kingman was not a road that got heavy traffic. It was not a road that got much of anything, especially in the afternoon when the serious heat settled in and most sensible people stayed off the asphalt. It was also, and Ryder knew this because he had ridden every mile of highway in northern Arizona, at one point or another, a road where a woman alone with a broken car and no cell signal was in a situation that could go from inconvenient to dangerous depending entirely on who happened to drive past. She's been out there 4 hours, Ryder said. It was not a question. At least, Maggie said. She was still watching him. Are you going to tell me how you know my daughter? Ryder pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Behind him, Cole turned toward the other 4 men and spoke 2 words too low for the rest of the diner to hear. 3 of the men moved immediately out the door toward the bikes pulling out phones. The 4th stayed near the entrance, not blocking it, just present, the way someone stays present when they're keeping situational awareness on an environment. Darlene, the waitress who had been frozen behind the counter with a coffee pot in her hand, watched all of this happen and made the pragmatic decision that the best thing she could do right now was keep the coffee hot and her mouth shut. That's a longer story than I can tell you right now, Ryder said to Maggie. And right now isn't the time for long stories. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table, and she looked at the tattoo on his left arm. The compass rose the small word inside the needle, and he watched her look at it. What I can tell you is that your daughter did something a long time ago that I owe her for, and I haven't paid that debt. And if she's on a broken highway right now, then I need to go find her. He paused. Is there anything else she told you, landmarks, mile markers, anything? Maggie thought for a moment. She said she'd passed a rest stop about 2 miles before she pulled over. One of those old stone ones that the CCC built, said it had a rusted swing set. She looked at him steadily. She sounded fine. She wasn't scared. My Sarah doesn't scare easily. No, Ryder said, and something quiet moved through his expression. She doesn't. Maggie's eyes sharpened. You do know her. Yes, ma'am, Ryder said. How well? He held her gaze. Well enough that I'd recognize that tattoo anywhere. A beat passed. It was her idea, Maggie said, not quite a question. Ryder said. It was mine. He stood up from the table. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to stay here. There's going to be people coming through here over the next hour or so. They'll be wearing the same vest I'm wearing. Tell them Ryder sent you and that you've already given me everything." He paused. "Darlene." Darlene, the waitress, startled so hard she nearly sloshed coffee on the counter. "Yes," she managed. "Keep the coffee coming for this woman and put whatever she orders on my tab." He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out 3 folded bills without looking at the denomination, and set them on the counter. "She doesn't leave this booth unless she wants to. Understand?" Darlene looked at the bills. She looked at Ryder. "Understood," she said in the voice of someone who understood several things simultaneously. Ryder turned back to Maggie. She was watching him with those steady blue eyes, and he could see in them the same quality he remembered from the last time he looked into eyes like hers. A different face, but the same genetic bedrock. The same bone-deep composure that didn't come from toughness alone, but from a particular kind of knowing. The kind of knowing that only came from having stood in impossible moments and chosen deliberately to stand. "Your daughter saved my life," he said. "I'm going to go return the favor." He walked out the door. The engine started. The trucker at the counter let out a breath he had apparently been holding for several minutes. The 2 young women looked at each other. The older couple by the register remained still for another moment. Then the husband reached across the table and covered his wife's hand with his, and she turned her palm up and held on. Maggie Whitmore picked up her crossword magazine. She did not start working the puzzle. She just held it and looked at the door and listened to the sound of 6 motorcycles pulling out of the parking lot and onto Route 89, and thought about her daughter at 4 years old, in a bathtub full of bubbles at 16, in the driver's seat of their old Ford for the first time at 29 on a desert highway alone, making a decision. And she breathed in and breathed out, and she held on. The diner settled back into its low ambient noise. The refrigeration unit behind the counter cycled on. A truck rolled past on the highway outside. Darlene refilled the 2 women's coffee without being asked because she needed something to do with her hands. It took 6 minutes for the first of the other bikes to arrive. Maggie looked up when she heard the engine. Through the front window, she watched a single motorcycle pull into the lot, a man in a black vest climbing off, pulling his phone from his pocket before he'd even gotten both feet on the ground. He came in through the door and scanned the room, and his eyes landed on her. "You Ryder's woman?" he asked. "I'm nobody's woman," Maggie said with a precision that startled him. "I'm the mother of the woman he went looking for. Sit down and I'll tell you what I told him." The man sat down. His name, she would learn, was Dennis. He was 43 years old, had ridden with the chapter for 11 years, and had received a text from Ryder that said 4 words and a set of coordinates. The 4 words were, "Call the whole network." "What network?" Maggie asked. Dennis looked at her for a moment, deciding something. "Then, ma'am, the Hells Angels have chapters in every major city between here and the California line. We've got members who work tow services, who drive commercial routes, who know every mile of back road in this state." He set his phone face up on the table, and she could see the screen filling with replies one after another, little green message bubbles popping up in a chain that didn't stop. "When Ryder sends a mobilization call, people move." Maggie looked at the screen. She looked at Dennis. "For one woman on a broken highway," she said. "Not just any woman," Dennis said. And then he seemed to catch himself as if he'd said something he wasn't sure he was authorized to say. He glanced down at the phone. "You said she was past the rest stop with the rusted swing set." "That's what she told me." "Okay." His fingers were already moving. "I know that stretch. Old Stone Rest Stop, the state keeps saying they'll restore it, and they keep not doing it." He typed something. "Sent it. We'll have eyes on that road in 20 minutes, maybe less." "Why, Baham?" Maggie asked, not suspiciously, genuinely. "Why does a call from one man mobilize all of that?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the phone, but he wasn't really seeing it. He was choosing his words with the careful attention of someone who knows that the words he's choosing matter and will be remembered. "Because 12 years ago," he said slowly, "something happened on a desert highway that most of us only know pieces of. What we know is that Ryder came back from a run that went wrong, and he came back alive when he shouldn't have been. And the only reason was a woman who stopped when she had every reason to keep driving." He paused. "Ryder doesn't talk about it, not in detail, but he put her tattoo on his arm. And when Ryder Callahan puts something on his arm, it means something permanent." Another pause. "So, yeah, For her, we mobilize. Maggie absorbed this. She set the crossword magazine down on the seat beside her and folded her hands on the table and looked at this man she had never met. And she thought about the tattoo on her daughter's arm that Sarah had gotten at 29 and had never fully explained, had only said once, "It's from someone who made me a promise, Mom," and then had changed the subject with the particular deflective grace that Maggie recognized as a move she herself had taught her. "What happened to him?" Maggie asked him. "On that road 12 years ago?" "I told you," Dennis said. "I only know pieces." "Tell me the pieces." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the phone again, watching the message chain scroll. "Ryder was running a route," he said, "out west, high desert. Him and two others. They got ambushed, 3 vehicles, 8 men, people who had a reason to want them stopped permanently, and enough organization to plan it properly." He stopped. His 2 riders went down hard. Ryder's bike went into a drainage ditch. He was hurt bad enough that he couldn't ride, couldn't call, couldn't do much of anything except not die yet. "And Sarah found him," Maggie said. "A nurse found him," Dennis said. "I'm in. Alone on a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere at night. She pulled over. She pulled him out of that ditch. She kept the men who came looking for him from finding him." He picked up his coffee mug. Ryder woke up in an abandoned structure 2 days later with his wounds cleaned and dressed in a note. The note said she was sorry she couldn't do more, and she hoped he'd be okay, and that was all. He took a drink. No name, no number, nothing. "But he found out who she was," Maggie said. "Eventually," Dennis said. "It took a while, but when you're motivated enough and you have enough people looking, you find what you're looking for." He set the mug down. He found out enough to know she was a nurse named Sarah from a small town in New Mexico. He found out enough to send something to her, the tattoo design with the note explaining what it meant. He paused. She sent back a photograph of the tattoo on her arm, already done. A small involuntary smile crossed his face and disappeared. That was Ryder's version of correspondence for the next 12 years. He knew she was out there. He knew the offer stood. He just never heard the call. Maggie was quiet for a long time. Outside, another set of engines. 2 this time, pulling into the lot. "My daughter," Maggie said finally, "is the most stubborn woman I have ever known in my life, including myself." She looked at Dennis. She would never have called. Not for a flat tire. Not for a dead engine. Not for anything short of... She stopped. Something shifted behind her eyes. "She didn't just break down," she said. "It wasn't a question." Dennis looked at her. "We don't know that," he said. But his voice had tightened slightly, and she heard it because she had been listening to people's voices for 71 years, and the sound of a person trying to be reassuring when they themselves are not reassured was one she knew precisely. "What do you know?" Maggie asked. Flat, steady, her crossword puzzle voice. Dennis set the phone down on the table and turned it so she could see the screen. One of the message replies in the chain had a different quality from the others. Not "I'm on my way" or "copy that" or ETA 15. This one said 2 vehicles parked near that stretch when I came through an hour ago. 1 old pickup, 1 sedan, didn't look broken down. Maggie read it. She read it again. She set both hands flat on the table and breathed in once slowly through her nose. "Go," she said to Dennis. "Ma'am." "I've got Darlene," she said, nodding toward the counter without taking her eyes off the message on the phone. "And those 2 are coming in." She tilted her head toward the window where 2 more vested men were crossing the parking lot. "Go. Find my daughter." Dennis stood up from the booth. He looked at her for a moment, this small white-haired woman with her crossword magazine and her reading glasses and her 2 flat hands on the Formica table, holding herself absolutely still. "She's going to be okay," he said. "Yes," Maggie said. "She is, because I spent 4 hours in this booth figuring out that God put me 11 miles outside of Flagstaff on a Tuesday afternoon for a reason." She looked up at him. "Go make sure he wasn't wrong." Dennis left. The 2 men coming in from the parking lot reached the door. One of them held it open for Dennis, and they exchanged 3 words and a nod, the compressed efficiency of people who share a common language of urgency, and then they were inside, and Dennis was gone, and the engines were starting again in the lot. The 2 men who came in were older mid-50s, Maggie guessed. One had a gray beard that matched his hair. The other was clean-shaven, with eyes that looked like they'd seen a lot of things and were still thinking about most of them. They came to her booth. "You're the mother," the bearded one said. Not a question. "I am," Maggie said. "Garrett," he said by way of introduction and gestured to the other man. "That's Lou. We're going to stay here with you." "I don't need staying with," Maggie said. "No, ma'am," Lou said with the quiet agreement of someone who had absolutely no intention of doing what she was suggesting. "You probably don't. But Ryder said stay, so we stay." He slid into the booth across from her with the careful ease of a large man in a small space. "Is that coffee fresh?" Maggie looked at him. She looked at Garrett, who had taken up a position near the end of the booth rather than sitting in a way that was simultaneously casual and not casual at all. "Darlene," Maggie called. Darlene materialized from behind the counter immediately in the way of someone who had been paying extremely close attention to everything that had happened in the last 40 minutes and had decided that the safest and most professional response was to be whatever these people needed her to be. "More coffee," Maggie said. "And whatever pie you have left. These men look like they haven't eaten." Darlene nodded and disappeared. Lou looked at Maggie with something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "She always liked this?" he asked Garrett, who was still standing at the end of the booth. "Don't know her," Garrett said. "Apple," Maggie said. Both men looked at her. "Apple pie," she said. "If Darlene has it, Sarah's favorite. Always has been." She folded her hands again. "Tell me about Ryder Callahan. Not the story Dennis told me, the real story." "The man." A silence. Garrett shifted his weight. Lou set his forearms on the table. Why?" Lou asked. "Because," Maggie said simply, "my daughter is on a highway somewhere, and the man who went to find her is a man I've known for 40 minutes. And I would like to know who my daughter trusted 12 years ago and why she's been trusting him in silence ever since." Lou looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the front window. "He's a good man," Lou said. "Hard man, but good." "That's not a story," Maggie said. "That's a sentence, another beat." Then Garrett moved to the booth and sat down, folding himself into the seat across from Maggie, with the deliberate care of a man making a decision. He set his hands flat on the table, and she saw on his right forearm not a compass rose, but something similar. A different design, the same intentionality. "Ryder lost people," Garrett said. "Before that night 12 years ago, brother in a bad run, his wife the year before that to an illness nobody caught in time. He paused, choosing. He was in a place where a lot of men stop being careful, because when you're not sure you want to keep going, you stop taking precautions." He met her eyes. "He told me once that the night he went into that ditch, part of him thought, fine, maybe this is when it stops." Maggie was still. "And then a woman pulled over," she said. "And then a woman pulled over," Garrett said, "and took care of him the way people take care of each other when there's nothing in it for them and they do it anyway. And when he came around 2 days later and she was gone, he paused again. He said it was like being brought back by someone who believed he was worth bringing back. When you're not sure of that yourself, having somebody decide it for you." He stopped. "It matters." Maggie looked at her coffee cup. "She never told me any of this," she said. "Not with pain, just with the particular acknowledgement of a parent who understands that there are whole countries inside their children that they will never visit." "She probably didn't know most of it," Garrett said. "She just stopped. That's all she did. She just stopped." The pie arrived. Apple, as it turned out. Darlene set it down in 2 slices without comment and refilled all 3 coffees and withdrew with the graceful invisibility of someone who had found her place in the situation. Maggie looked at the pie. She thought about Sarah at 32 in her apartment kitchen, making apple pie the way Maggie had taught her, calling on the phone with flour on her hands and saying, "Mom, why does mine never taste like yours?" And Maggie saying, "Because you're not patient enough with the crust, sweetheart." And Sarah saying, "I'm patient." And Maggie saying, "You are the least patient person I have raised, and I raised 3 of you." "She stopped," Maggie said quietly, "because that's what you do." Lou and Garrett were quiet. "That's what I taught her," Maggie said. "When someone needs help, you stop. You don't calculate whether it's safe or convenient or whether you will get anything out of it. You stop." She looked up. I didn't know she'd passed that lesson along to a Hells Angels chapter. It was not a joke exactly, but Lou's mouth did something that in better circumstances would have been a laugh. Maggie's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it so fast that both men went still. Unknown number. Arizona area code. She picked it up. Sarah, she said, static. Then a voice not Sarah's, male, young, somewhat out of breath. Ma'am, this is Carlos. I'm with the Kingman chapter. I'm on Route 66 East. I just passed the Stone Rest stop. I can see a car pulled over about a quarter-mile ahead. Sedan out of state plates, looks like New Mexico. I'm going to do a slow pass and call back. Don't slow pass, Maggie said. Stop. A half-second pause. Ma'am, Ryder said. I know what Ryder said, Maggie said. Stop anyway. If that's my daughter's car and she's been on that highway for 4 hours and there are 2 unknown vehicles in the area, a slow pass is not going to help her. A pause. Stop. Introduce yourself. Let her know people are coming. Another pause. Longer. Yes, ma'am, Carlos said. The line stayed open. Maggie held the phone and listened to the sound of an engine slowing gravel crackling under tires, a motorcycle coming to a stop. Garrett and Lou were leaning forward slightly without seeming to realize it. Then through the phone, muffled by distance and wind, Maggie heard her daughter's voice. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew the voice. She had known that voice since the first moment she had heard it 42 years ago. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, the most furious and determined sound she had ever encountered in her life. She closed her eyes and held the phone against her ear and listened to the sound of her daughter alive on a highway in the desert. And she did not cry. She breathed in. She breathed out. Thank you, she said, though Carlos couldn't hear her. She opened her eyes. Garrett and Lou were looking at her. She's there, Maggie said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Lou picked up his fork and cut into his piece of apple pie, and Garrett reached out and wrapped 2 fingers briefly around his coffee mug, and Maggie set the phone down on the table face up where she could see it, and the 3 of them sat in the corner booth of the Painted Spur Diner, while outside in the parking lot, 2 more motorcycles pulled in, and the afternoon light moved across the Arizona high desert in long gold sheets, and somewhere on a broken highway 15 miles away, a woman who had once stopped to help a stranger was about to discover 4 hours and 12 years later that the stranger had never once forgotten. Carlos was 26 years old and had been riding with the Kingman chapter for 3 years, which meant he had seen enough to know when a situation was simple and when it only looked simple from the outside. This one looked simple from the outside. Woman with a broken car pulled over on a quiet stretch of Route 66. Straightforward. Routine. The kind of thing that resolved itself in an hour with a tow truck and a phone call. But the 2 vehicles Dennis had flagged in the message chain were still sitting in his mind like a splinter. And when he pulled his bike off the road and put both feet down and looked at the sedan with the New Mexico plates, he did not feel routine. He felt a particular sharpening of attention that his body had learned to produce when something in the environment was asking him to pay closer attention than the surface suggested. The car was a silver Honda Civic, maybe 8 years old, pulled as far onto the gravel shoulder as it would go. The hood was up. That much was consistent with the story. What was not immediately consistent was the absence of the driver. The car was there. The driver was not visible. Carlos walked forward. Hello, he called out. Not loud, measured, nothing for 2 seconds. Then a voice came from the other side of the car, from the ditch side, low and controlled. I'm here. Don't come around fast. He stopped. Processed. I'm not going to. I'm Carlos. I ride with the Kingman chapter. Your mother called. A pause that lasted long enough for him to count 5 heartbeats. Then Sarah Whitmore stood up from behind her car. She was in her early 40s, dark blonde hair pulled back, wearing the kind of clothes people wore when they were driving long distances and had stopped thinking about how they looked. Jeans, a light blue shirt, dust on both knees from whatever she'd been doing, crouched beside the car. She was holding a lug wrench in her right hand with the easy, unself-conscious grip of someone who had picked it up for a reason and hadn't decided yet whether to put it down. She looked at him. She looked at the vest. Something moved through her face, not relief exactly, more like recognition, the kind that carries weight. Kingman chapter, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. How did my mother... She stopped, started again. How did she know to call you? Carlos opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the vest she was looking at, and then at the road, and then at her. She didn't exactly call us, he said. She walked into a diner 11 miles north of Flagstaff and told Ryder Callahan that her daughter had his tattoo. Sarah Whitmore went very still. The lug wrench stayed in her hand. Ryder, she said, not a question, not quite a statement, something in between the sound a person makes when a name they've carried privately for a long time suddenly enters the open air. He's on his way, Carlos said. He mobilized the network about 40 minutes ago. There are going to be a lot of bikes on this road in the next 15 minutes. He paused, and because he was 26 and still had the instinct to fill silences he wasn't sure how to read, he added, "You're going to have more help than you probably need." Sarah looked down the road. She looked in both directions, the practiced habitual scan of someone who had been doing it for a while. Then she looked back at Carlos. "The two trucks," she said, "about 100 yards east. Did you pass them?" He had. He'd clocked them on the way in an old Chevy pickup, the kind that had been worked hard for a long time, and a newer sedan, dark blue, parked close together on the same side of the road. Two men visible when he'd passed. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't wanted to signal that he was there for a specific reason until he'd made contact first. "I saw them," he said. "They've been there for 2 hours," Sarah said. "The first one pulled up about 40 minutes after my car died. He said he could help with the engine. I said I was fine. He said he'd wait." She paused. "The second one came 40 minutes after that. They know each other. I could tell by the way they didn't look at each other." Carlos looked east down the road. "Did either of them touch you?" "No. Flat, direct. I made sure they understood what would happen if they tried." She glanced at the lug wrench, then set it on the car roof with a deliberate lightness, like she was putting down something she'd been carrying too long. "But it's been 2 hours and I'm tired of performing calm. I don't completely feel." It was the most honest thing she'd said, and it landed with a weight that told him it was the first time she'd said it out loud. "Okay," Carlos said. He pulled out his phone and sent a text with 2 words in the coordinates eyes east. Then he looked up. "Your mom said to stop and introduce myself and let you know people were coming." "So, people are coming." He paused. "She also overrode Ryder's instruction to do a slow pass and told me to stop instead." For the first time, something shifted in Sarah's expression that wasn't vigilance or calculation. It was smaller than a smile, but related to one. "That sounds right," she said. "She's something," Carlos said. "Yes," Sarah said. "She is." She looked down the road again. Then with the tone of someone asking a practical question, because practical questions were the ones she knew how to ask, "How long until Ryder gets here?" "Hard to say. He left Flagstaff heading south before I got your location confirmed, so he may have had to adjust route. 40 minutes maybe, could be less." He looked east. "But there are closer riders than him. I've got 3 responses from people within 10 miles of this stretch." Sarah nodded, absorbed it, organized it. "The car isn't actually broken," she said. Carlos looked at her. "The engine light came on," she said. "I pulled over because the light came on and I heard something in the belt. I got out to look, and I realized it was probably just the serpentine belt slipping. It does that in heat. I could have driven it. I should have driven it." A pause. "But by the time I figured that out, the first truck had pulled up, and if I got back in the car and drove away, it would have meant driving past both of them, and I wasn't sure I wanted to give them that angle." She picked up the lug wrench again without seeming to think about it. "So I stayed, and I waited, and I called my mother because I didn't have signal for anyone else, and she was the last number I dialed." Carlos processed this. "You've been strategically broken down for 2 hours." "I've been strategically broken down for 2 hours," Sarah confirmed. He almost laughed. He caught it and converted it into a slow exhale. "You could have called for help when you had signal, before you pulled over. The light came on. I pulled over. I lost signal within 2 minutes of stopping. It was fast." She glanced east again. "And I didn't think I'd need help. I thought they'd get bored and leave." A beat. They didn't get bored and leave. From down the road, barely audible at first, then growing the sound of an engine. A motorcycle coming from the east. Then another. Then a third. Sarah turned toward the sound. The 3 bikes came into view, slowing as they approached, pulling up on the road in front of her car, with the coordinated ease of people who had done this kind of thing before. 3 men, 3 vests, 3 different faces that all shared the same expression. They'd arrived, they'd assessed, they were present. The one in front, who was closest, looked past Sarah toward the east. "Those the vehicles," he said to Carlos. "That's them." The man Sarah would learn his name was Webb, out of the Flagstaff, chapter 51 years old, and built like someone who had spent decades not letting things happen to people. He didn't want things happening to looked east for a long moment, with the steady evaluation of someone running calculations. Then he looked at Sarah. "Ma'am," he said, "you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah said. "I'm fine." He looked at her the way that people look at other people when they're measuring the distance between what is being said and what's true. "You sure?" "I'm fine," she said again, with more precision this time, "because I chose to be fine. But I'm also ready to be done with this particular situation." Webb nodded once. "Understood." He looked at the other two riders. "Park up. We're going to make sure those gentlemen understand that this stretch of road just got a lot more occupied." He didn't say it loudly. He didn't say it in the direction of the two parked vehicles. He said it in the calm, matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a logistical decision, which somehow made it more convincing than any amount of volume would have. The two riders moved their bikes to either side of the road in front of Sarah's car. Webb stayed where he was. Sarah watched him. "You know, Ryder?" she asked. "Since before you were probably paying attention to such things," Webb said without particular emphasis, just as information. "He's coming," she said. "He's coming," Webb agreed. She looked down at the lug wrench in her hand. She set it on the car roof again. She looked at the tattoo on the inside of her left forearm. The compass rose the small word inside the north needle, the ink that had been there for 12 years in a place she could see without effort, but that most people would only notice if they were close and looking. "How much do you know," she asked, "about what happened 12 years ago?" "Yes, enough," Webb said. "Not everything. The parts Ryder shared, which aren't many, but they're specific." He paused. "He told us what the tattoo meant the day he got it. He said if you ever see this on someone who isn't me, you treat that person like family. No questions. No conditions." He looked at the tattoo on her arm. "So that's what we're doing." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then from the east, both doors of the Chevy pickup opened simultaneously. Webb straightened slightly. Not dramatically, not with aggression, just upright, oriented. Two men got out. One was tall and lean, late 30s, with the particular kind of casual that was anything but. The other was shorter, heavyset, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. They walked toward the group with the over-deliberate casualness of men who were very aware of how they were being perceived and were working hard to seem unconcerned about it. The tall one spoke first, addressed the group generally, but looked at Webb. "You all know this woman," he said. There was a friendliness in it that didn't reach the eyes. "Yes," Webb said, "just that." The tall man looked at the vests, looked at Sarah, looked back at Webb. "We've been making sure she's okay. Engine trouble, we thought. Wanted to make sure she had help." "She has help," Webb said. "A beat." "Right," the tall man said. "Good, that's good." He glanced at the short man, then back at Webb. "We'll get out of your way then." "That'd be fine," Webb said, still calm, still even, still standing exactly where he was standing. The tall man looked at Sarah. One more look, the kind that was meant to convey something without being articulable as a specific threat. Sarah met it directly without expression, and he held it for 2 seconds and then looked away. They walked back to the truck. The sedan's engine started. The truck's engine started. They pulled out onto the road in the direction of Kingman and drove. Carlos let out a breath that had apparently been building for a while. Webb watched the vehicles go until they were small in the distance, and then he looked at Sarah, and something in his expression shifted the professional steadiness, loosening just slightly towards something more human. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked. Sarah blinked. Of all the questions she'd been prepared for, that one was not in the set. "What?" "You've been on a highway in July for 4 hours, Webb said. "Did you eat lunch?" "I had a granola bar," Sarah said, with the tone of someone who was only now realizing how inadequate that answer was. "Okay," Webb said. He looked at Carlos. "You got anything on you?" Carlos reached into the saddlebag on his bike with the confidence of a man who always had things on him and produced, after a brief search, a package of peanut butter crackers and a water bottle that was still cold from a gas station stopped 2 hours ago. He offered them to Sarah. She looked at the crackers. She looked at the water. She took them and cracked the water open and drank half of it before she stopped, and the sound of someone who has been more dehydrated than they realized drinking water was one of the most ordinary sounds in the world. And somehow in the middle of that highway, in the afternoon heat, it was also one of the most human things any of them had witnessed in a long time. "Thank you," she said. She said it to Carlos specifically, but it landed on all three of them. "Don't thank me," Carlos said. "Thank your mother. She's the one who made me stop." Sarah looked at the road north toward Flagstaff, toward wherever her mother was sitting in a diner booth with a crossword magazine and two Hell's Angels in the particular brand of terrifying composure that Maggie Whitmore had deployed in every crisis of her 71 years. "She does that," Sarah said softly. She ate two crackers. She drank more water. She leaned back against the side of her car and looked up at the sky with the slow, deliberate look of someone recalibrating, letting the vigilance unwind by a single degree because the danger had walked away, and there were people here now, and the road south was open. Then she looked at Webb. "Tell me something," she said. "Be straight with me." "I'll try," Webb said. "Ryder," she said. "How is he actually?" Webb was quiet for a moment, not evasive, just choosing the right thing. "He's been riding hard for 12 years, Webb said. "He lost people. You know what happened before that night. You don't know the full picture, but you know enough. He paused. He carries it, but he carries it forward. That's the difference with Ryder. Some men carry weight and it stops them. He carries it and keeps moving." He looked at her steadily. "He never forgot what you did, not for a single day of those 12 years. "I didn't do anything remarkable," Sarah said. The flatness of it told Webb she believed it completely, and that it was probably the sentence she'd said to herself every time the memory came up. "You stopped," Webb said. "Anyone would have stopped." "No," Webb said with the patience that came from having thought about this. "They wouldn't. We both know that. People drive past. It's not cruelty. It's fear. It's self-preservation. It's the calculation that someone else will handle it. You didn't calculate. You just stopped." He paused. "Ryder knows the difference between someone who helps because they're supposed to and someone who helps because they couldn't not. You were the second kind. That's what he's been carrying." Sarah looked at the crackers in her hand. She had carried it too in her own way. Not with weight exactly. More like a question that had never fully closed whether he'd made it, whether the promise on her arm had ever been real, or just the fevered words of a badly hurt man who might not have survived the week. She had gotten the tattoo design in the mail 4 months after that night with the note that explained what it meant, and she had gone to the tattoo studio with her heart doing something complicated in her chest, and had put it on her arm and had never told anyone the full story. Not her mother, not her colleagues, not the friends who asked about it at the beach. It was hers. The way some things are just yours, not secret exactly, but private, not hidden, but not shared, belonging to the part of yourself that you keep close because it's the realest part, and the real parts need protecting. "He should have found me sooner," she said, and then immediately, I don't mean that as, "It's okay," Webb said. "I spent 6 months after that waiting," she said before she could stop herself. "Not waiting for him specifically, just alert. Expecting something, and then it settled down and I stopped expecting, and then the package came and I thought, okay, he made it. He's okay. That's enough." She looked at the tattoo, and it was enough. It was. "But," Webb said. She looked at him, but nothing. It was enough. He nodded. He didn't push. "You know what I do?" she said after a moment, different tone. Drier. "I'm a home care nurse. I go to people's houses and I take care of them when they can't take care of themselves. Old people mostly, people after surgery, people whose families can't be there all the time." She looked at her hands. "I've been doing it for 15 years. I've driven 1,000,000 miles on back roads getting to people's houses. I've sat with people in the middle of the night. I've held someone's hand while they died because their family didn't make it in time." She paused. "And every single time I drive a 2-lane highway at night, I look at the shoulders. I check the ditches. I scan for headlights that aren't moving." She said the last part with a quiet precision that was not self-pity. It was just truth. "I don't know when I started doing that, but I know why." Webb didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "He does the same thing. He looks at the shoulders on every road he rides." Sarah looked at him. "He told me once," Webb said. "He said the highway has a way of teaching you what matters. He said he learned it from someone who pulled over when they didn't have to. He looked at her with the careful directness of a man who didn't offer things like this lightly. He's been looking for ways to repay a debt to someone who didn't leave him an address. That's not a small thing to carry. From the North Engines. More of them this time. A column of bikes coming south on Route 66, visible as a group, before they were audible individually, the sound building from a low vibration to a full-throated rumble that you felt through the ground before you processed it with your ears. Carlos turned toward the sound. Webb stood up straight. The other two riders moved instinctively to better positions, not toward threat, just toward orientation, the way a group of people moves when someone important is arriving. Sarah straightened. She didn't know what she expected to feel. She'd had 12 years to think about this moment in the abstract, whether it would ever come, what it would look like, whether she'd have anything worth saying. In 12 years, she'd imagined it clean and orchestrated the way you imagine things when you have too much time on a quiet highway at 3 a.m, and the radio is on low and the road is straight and your mind goes where it goes. She had not imagined it like this. Broken down car dust on her knees, 2 hours of white-knuckled calm evaporating into the afternoon air. Peanut butter crackers in her hand, 4 strangers in leather vests watching from various points on a road that shimmered with heat. She had not imagined her mother would be the one to find him. She pressed 2 fingers flat against the tattoo on her forearm, a gesture she'd had for 12 years and had never explained to anyone, and she breathed in once and let it out and waited. The column of bikes slowed as it reached the shoulder of the road. 6 bikes, then 7, then 9, pulling over in a disciplined line that occupied the road shoulder with the organized authority of people who had done coordinated arrivals before. Engines cutting one by one, the sound going from full roar to staggered quiet to complete silence in under 30 seconds. The riders dismounted. Ryder Callahan was off his bike before it had fully stopped rocking, moving toward her with the long, deliberate stride of someone who had been riding hard and fast for the last 40 minutes and was still burning with it. He was gray-haired and weathered, and the lines on his face were the kind that came from decades of sun and wind, and things survived, and he was looking at her with an expression that did something complicated to the air between them. He stopped 6 feet away. She looked at him. He looked at her. 12 years was a long time. They had both aged through it, not badly, not dramatically, just in the way that time ages people who live their lives fully and don't apologize for the accumulation. He had more gray. She had more lines around her eyes. They were both exactly recognizable from what they had been. "You're okay," he said. It came out almost like a confirmation, like a man checking something off a list that had been open for a very long time. "I'm okay," she said. A beat. "You eat something," he said. She held up the crackers. Something in his expression shifted almost into something that was not quite a smile, but was the closest relative of one. "Good." "Carlos made me," she said. "Good man," Ryder said, without taking his eyes off her. She looked at him. He looked at her. The 9 riders who had come with him, and Webb and Carlos and the other 2, they were all standing in their various positions, doing the thing that people in groups do when they know they are witnessing something private, which was to look at everything except the 2 people at the center of it. "You mobilized your entire network," Sarah said. "I did," Ryder said, "for a broken down car." "For you," he said. "Simple. No decoration. Not the car." She looked down at the cracker in her hand, looked at the road, looked at the tattoo on her arm, and then deliberately looked away from it back at him. "I didn't call for help," she said. "I called my mother because she was the last number I dialed, and I didn't want her to worry. I wasn't—" She stopped. "I wasn't asking." "I know," Ryder said. "You came anyway." "Yes. Because of—" She started to gesture at the tattoo, and he shook his head slightly. "Because of you," he said. "The tattoo is just the reason I knew it was you." She absorbed this. She was a woman who had spent 15 years taking care of people who needed it, who had built her entire professional and personal identity around the premise that helping was something you did without expectation of return, that the giving was the thing and the rest didn't matter. She was also a woman who had spent 12 years carrying the weight of a night on a desert highway and the strange intimacy of having saved someone's life in the dark and then walked away, and the particular loneliness of having never been able to tell anyone fully why that mattered as much as it did. She was not, in other words, someone who received help easily. She looked at the group of men on the road 9, 10, 12, if she counted the earlier arrivals. Different ages, different faces, all wearing the same vest. All of them here, all of them having moved within an hour of a call from a man they followed to a stretch of Route 66 in northern Arizona for a woman most of them had never met. I don't know what to say, she said. And it was the truest sentence she'd said all afternoon because she was a woman who always knew what to say, and finding herself without it was something. You don't have to say anything, Ryder said. Ryder, Sarah. He said her name with the deliberate weight of someone who had thought about saying it for a very long time. You spent 2 hours alone on a highway, keeping yourself calm and keeping yourself safe, and you did it. You're fine. You handled it. He paused. But you shouldn't have had to do it alone, and that's on me. I had 12 years to make sure you had a way to reach us, and I handled it with an envelope and a tattoo design, and I told myself that was enough. Something moved through his expression. It wasn't enough. She looked at him. It was enough, she said. I told myself it was enough, and I meant it. And now, a pause. And now there are 12 motorcycles on Route 66, and my mother is in a diner with 2 of your men, and I'm eating crackers on the side of the road, she said. So maybe enough is a relative concept. This time, something in his face actually broke toward warmth, just briefly, just enough to show what was underneath the weathered steadiness. Your mother, he said, with the particular tone of a man who has encountered a force of nature and is still processing the encounter. She looked at me like she could see through the back of my head. She can, Sarah said. She's been doing it to me since 1982. I still haven't figured out how. She told me you were on a broken highway, and she told me in exactly the tone of someone explaining where the milk was, Ryder said. Completely calm, like she'd already worked out what was going to happen, and she just needed me to catch up. That's Maggie Whitmore, Sarah said. That's where you get it, Ryder said. She looked at him, and this time there was something different in the look. Less assessment, less distance. The composure was still there, but it had shifted quality. It was softer at the edges, more real. She found you by accident, Sarah said. She didn't know. She saw the tattoo, and she said something because that's what she does. She says things. It wasn't an accident, Ryder said. She tilted her head slightly. 12 years, he said. I've been on every highway in this state. I've been in 100 diners between here and the California line. The one day I happened to stop at the Painted Spur on Route 89, the mother of the woman I've owed a debt to for 12 years is sitting in the corner booth. He held her gaze. That's not an accident. That's the road giving you what you should have gotten earlier. Sarah looked at the horizon. She pressed 2 fingers against the tattoo one more time, held them there for a count of 3, took them away. I need to call my mother, she said. Yes, you do, Ryder said. She pulled out her phone. 2 bars of signal had returned the way signal returned on desert roads when the angle changed slightly or the atmosphere shifted in ways that nobody could fully explain. She found her mother's contact listed simply as Mom because Sarah Whitmore had never been someone who needed reminder prompts to know who her mother was and pressed call. It rang once. Are you hurt? Maggie said. No hello, no preamble. I'm fine, Mom, Sarah said. Are you actually fine, or are you performing fine for an audience? Sarah looked at the 12 men on the road. Both a little. Good, Maggie said. That's honest. A pause. The tall one with the gray beard. Ryder, is he there? He's standing in front of me. Good. Another pause shorter. Tell him that the pie here is apple and he missed it. Sarah looked at Ryder. My mother says the pie at the diner is apple and you missed it. Something crossed Ryder's face that was unambiguously, this time a smile. Small and real and the kind that lived close to the surface in people who had forgotten they still had them. Tell her we'll go back, he said. Sarah relayed this. Maggie was quiet for a moment on the other end. Then in a voice that was steady in the way that very controlled voices sometimes are, when the person behind them is feeling something they have decided not to perform. Come straight here, Sarah Ann. Don't take any detours. Yes, ma'am, Sarah said. She hung up. She looked at the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she looked at Ryder. She called me Sarah Ann, she said. She only does that when she's been scared. She wasn't scared, Ryder said. She was waiting. There's a difference. You talked to her for how long? Maybe 10 minutes at the diner, but she talked to some of my men for longer. He paused. Garrett told me she asked for the whole story, the real one, The pieces anyway. Sarah absorbed this quietly. What did he tell her? What he knew. Which is that a woman stopped on a dark highway and saved a man's life and didn't ask for anything in return, Ryder said. That the man never forgot it. That 12 years is a long time to carry a debt without paying it. He looked at her directly. And that today was the day the road made it possible to start. She was quiet. The afternoon heat moved around them. Webb had drifted a few yards away and was talking to two of the other riders in the low-content murmur of men with nothing urgent left to do. Carlos had found a spot leaning against his bike and was looking at his phone with the particular satisfaction of a 26-year-old who had done exactly the right thing and knew it. Start, Sarah said, repeating the word back to him. It's not finished, Ryder said. Not yet. We're going to get your car looked at. One of my people runs a shop in Kingman. He'll have someone out here inside the hour. Then we'll ride you back to your mother. He paused. And somewhere in there, if you're willing, I'd like to tell you the things that should have been said a long time ago. He met her eyes steadily. Not as payment of a debt, just as truth. Because you deserve the whole truth, not just the parts that fit in an envelope. She held his gaze for a long moment. Okay, she said. Just that. Just okay. The smallest possible word that contained the largest possible agreement. Ryder nodded once. He pulled out his phone and typed a number and waited. When someone answered, he said, It's me. I need a flatbed on Route 66 east of the Old Stone Rest Stop. Silver Civic. Yeah. A pause. How soon? He listened. Good, thank you. He hung up. He looked at Sarah. 45 minutes, he said. We have time. She looked at the desert around them. The long, flat reach of it, the heat shimmer above the road, the immense and impersonal blue of the July sky. She had driven through this landscape hundreds of times in her life, and it had always meant something different, depending on the direction she was heading and the thing she was carrying. Right now, leaning against her silver Honda Civic on a cracked shoulder of Route 66, with 12 men in black vests dispersed around her and her mother's apple pie voice still in her ear and the tattoo on her left arm catching the light, it meant something she didn't have a word for yet. Something that felt unexpectedly like the end of a long drive. 45 minutes, she said. She pushed off the car and stood straight. Then tell me everything. The flatbed was 45 minutes away, and Ryder Callahan had promised her the truth. So that was what she was going to get. He didn't ease into it. He wasn't a man who eased into things. He sat on the hood of her car. She hadn't invited him, but she hadn't stopped him either, and the hood was warm from the engine and the afternoon sun, and it held both of them without complaint. And he looked at the road ahead of them, not at her, and he started talking. The night you found me, he said, I had already decided something. Sarah looked at him. Not consciously, he said. Not the way you decide to change your route or order the fish instead of the steak. More like the decision had been made somewhere below where decisions usually get made, and I just hadn't caught up to it yet. He turned the inside of his left forearm upward. The compass rose visible in the late afternoon light. I was riding fast, and I wasn't being careful, and the men who ambushed us knew that because they had been watching long enough to know when I stopped being careful, which means I'd been not careful for a while. How long? Sarah asked. My wife died 14 months before that night, he said. Cancer, fast kind, 14 months from diagnosis to... He stopped, recalibrated. 11 months after her, one of my closest brothers went down on a run. Not an ambush, just road, just speed in a corner that didn't give enough warning. He paused again. After that, I stopped being particular about outcomes. Sarah said nothing. She understood what he meant by that. She'd sat with enough dying people to know the difference between someone who was afraid to die and someone who had simply stopped ranking survival as the priority it used to be. So when the ambush came, he said, I wasn't afraid. I was riding with Danny and Hector, good men, both of them. Danny went down first, bike hit hard, went into the opposite ditch. Hector tried to pull wide and they clipped him. I got through the first pass and then my front wheel caught something on the shoulder and I went over the edge. He said it with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who has reviewed the sequence many times. I remember hitting the ditch. I remember the sound. After that, nothing for a while. How long were you down there before I came? Sarah asked. Based on where the light was when I woke up the second time, maybe 4 hours. Could have been longer. He turned to look at her for the first time since he'd started. Do you remember what you saw when you stopped? She looked at the road. Your bike on its side in the ditch. The headlight was still on, pointing up at an angle. I almost didn't see it from the road. It was the reflection I caught. The chrome. You almost didn't stop, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact he needed to confirm. I slowed down, she said. I saw the chrome and I slowed down and I told myself it could be anything. Old wreck, something dumped. A pause. Then I saw your hand. He was quiet. Just your hand, she said, sticking up above the edge of the ditch, not moving, just there. She looked at her own hands. I pulled over before I'd finished deciding to pull over. I know the feeling, he said quietly. You were breathing, she said. That was the first thing I checked. And then I checked the road in both directions, and it was empty, and I got down into that ditch, and I started assessing. She said it clinically, the way nurses said things when they were describing medical situations, clean language used to create distance from the emotion embedded in the memory. You had a broken rib, maybe two, a gash on your left temple that needed pressure. Your right shoulder was dislocated, and you were running a fever that told me the rib might have clipped something internally. You knew all that in how long, Ryder said. 3 minutes, Sarah said. You learn fast when there's nobody else. And then the other vehicle came, he said. She nodded. Headlights from the east, moving slow, too slow for someone just passing through. She paused. I heard them before I saw them. I had maybe 90 seconds. What did you do? I covered your bike, she said. There was brush in the ditch, dead mesquite enough to break the silhouette. And then I lay down next to you and I put my hand over the gash on your head to keep the pressure on, and I just stayed still. Ryder looked at her. You lay down in the ditch, he said. It was the fastest way to get both of us below the sight line, she said with the complete reasonableness of someone who in the moment had not experienced it as extraordinary. The vehicle came past, slow, stopped for about 20 seconds just above us. I could hear the engine idling. She paused, and then it moved on. That was one of the men who ambushed us, Ryder said, coming back to check the ditch. He said it without drama. If you'd been standing, he'd have seen you. I know, Sarah said. I figured that out while I was lying there. And you were still there when he came back the second time. She turned to look at him. There was a second pass. About 40 minutes later, he said, you were still in the ditch. I was drifting in and out. I remember a vehicle on the road. I remember you not moving. She was quiet for a moment, recalibrating, filling in the gap between what she'd experienced and what she hadn't known she'd experienced. I remember that, she said slowly. I thought I'd imagined it. I thought I'd fallen asleep and dreamed headlights. You didn't dream them, Ryder said. He came back and you didn't move, and he left. He held her gaze. Twice. You did that twice. I didn't know it was twice, she said. I know, he said. That's almost the point. She looked away. She pressed 2 fingers against the tattoo. It was a habit she didn't think about anymore, the same way people reach for a cross at their throat or twisted a wedding ring. Some automatic gesture that connected the present to the thing that mattered. After the second pass, she said, I started working on getting you moved. I couldn't get you up the ditch on my own. You're not a small man, but there was a culvert about 30 yards east, a concrete maintenance structure. Big enough. She paused. I don't know how long it took. I was working slow because I didn't want to make noise, and you were conscious for about half of it, which was harder in some ways because you kept trying to tell me to leave you. Ryder exhaled slowly. I remember that. You said go, just go. You don't owe me anything. I meant it, he said. I know, she said. I ignored it. Something shifted in his expression. Not performance, not the constructed steadiness he usually wore. Something underneath that, older and less managed. Why, he said, honestly, why didn't you go? She was quiet for a long moment. Because you said that, she said finally, because the first thing you told a stranger who was trying to help you was that she didn't owe you anything and she should leave. She looked at him, and I thought nobody who says that is someone you leave. He looked at the road for a long time after that. The afternoon heat was settling toward the specific quality that the Arizona desert got in late July, when the direct sun began its angle downward, but the stored warmth of the earth started radiating back upward, and the air between those two forces was close and total. Somewhere down the road, one of the riders had a radio on low country music drifting thin across the gravel. Danny and Hector, Sarah said. What happened to them? Danny broke his arm in 3 places and cracked his helmet hard enough to give him a concussion that lasted 2 weeks, Ryder said. He rode again by October. A pause. Hector lost the leg, below the knee. He's got a prosthetic now. Still rides modified bike. He paused again. He asked me once, a few years back, who the woman was. The one who'd stayed with me. I told him I was still working on finding out. Did you keep looking? Sarah asked. Every year, he said. Hit dead ends. You'd moved twice. Changed clinics. The name was common enough that the search kept broadening instead of narrowing. He looked at her. I almost found you 3 years ago. There was a Sarah Whitmore in Albuquerque, home care nurse, right age. I sent someone to check. Sarah stared at him. That was me. 3 years ago, I was in Albuquerque. I know, he said. My guy got there and you'd already moved. 2 weeks prior. She processed this. I took the job in Gallup because the pay was better. 2 weeks, Ryder said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost wasn't. 2 weeks. The road makes you wait, he said. Apparently it had more waiting in mind. She shook her head slowly. Your guy came to find me in Albuquerque and I'd left for Gallup 2 weeks before. And then today your mother walks into a diner on Route 89. Because she was driving from Flagstaff to Gallup to see me, Sarah said. She does it every few months. She stops at that diner she's been stopping there for 20 years. She loves their coffee. She paused. She has no idea she does this. She would not describe herself as someone with a routine. But she stops at the same diner on the same road every time she drives to see her daughter, Ryder said. Every single time, Sarah confirmed. They sat with that for a moment. Okay, Brain, Ryder said. I'll stop arguing with the road. Sarah looked at him with something that was this time unmistakably the beginning of a real smile. It appeared briefly, and then she brought it back under control because she was still Sarah Whitmore, and she was still on a highway, and she was still in the middle of something large, and she was not yet ready to let the full shape of it land on her. But it had been there. He'd seen it. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed not dramatically, but in the way that people's expressions change when they see a number that means a specific thing. I need to take this, he said. He got off the hood of her car and walked 15 feet away and answered. His voice was low. She could see his posture, but not hear his words. His back was half turned, his weight was forward, both feet flat on the ground in the stance of a man receiving information he was processing quickly. Webb drifted close to Sarah with the casual non-commitment of someone who wasn't hovering. You doing okay, he said. I'm fine, she said. She was watching Ryder. What's that about? Don't know yet, Webb said, and then a beat later with slightly less neutrality. Could be nothing. Could be, Sarah said. Ryder came back. He slid the phone into his vest pocket and looked at Sarah with an expression that was careful in a specific way, the way of someone managing the release of information. The 2 vehicles that were parked east of you, he said. Yes, Sarah said. They didn't go to Kingman, he said. She looked at him. One of my people picked them up on Route 93 heading south, tracked them for 12 miles and then flagged me. He paused. They weren't random. They were connected to something that happened 6 weeks ago, a situation involving a supply route and a disagreement about territory. Nothing to do with you specifically, but they knew your chapter would be in this area today, Sarah said. He stopped. She looked at him steadily. You had a scheduled ride today. Someone who knew your route could have known roughly where you'd be. And if they wanted to send a message or create pressure, finding someone associated with you on a quiet highway would be a way to do that. Ryder looked at her for a long moment. How did you... I'm a nurse, she said. I spend a lot of time in people's houses alone, with people who are vulnerable and sometimes have complicated situations. You learn to read the context of a problem, not just the surface of it. She paused. They weren't waiting for a stranded woman on a hot highway. They were waiting to see who showed up for her. The silence that followed was the kind that had information in it. Webb said quietly and with considerable feeling, well, am I wrong? Sarah said to Ryder. No, he said, you're not wrong. So they weren't a random threat. No, they were surveillance, watching who responded to the call. He looked at his phone, then at Webb, which means they saw the whole network move. 12 motorcycles on Route 66, Webb said. 12 motorcycles from 4 chapters in under an hour, Ryder said, on a Tuesday afternoon. He looked at Sarah. They got the message they came for, but they didn't expect 12. They were expecting maybe a few. So now they know, Sarah said. Now they know, Ryder agreed. She looked at the road east empty. Now the heat shimmer above the asphalt, making the distance look liquid. She looked at the compass, rose on her arm. She looked at Ryder. I walked into this completely by accident, she said. You broke down on a highway, he said. My belt slipped, she said. In the heat. In the heat, he agreed. She processed this for a moment. Then is this going to be a problem for you going forward? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. It would have come to a head regardless. They've been pushing for 2 months. This just clarified things. He looked at her directly. It's not your problem, and it won't become your problem. I'll make certain of that. I'm not asking you to protect me, she said. I know you're not, he said, but I'm telling you anyway. She held his gaze. Then something unexpected happened. From down the road where the riders had gathered in their loose formation, someone laughed. Not at anything specific, just the laughter that happens when a group of people who know each other well have been standing around long enough to relax. The sound of it was oddly normal, oddly human. It spread to 2 more people and then settled, and the radio drifted back into the foreground, and the afternoon around them had a quality to it that Sarah had not expected and could not immediately name. It felt like safety, not the absence of danger, not a locked door, but the specific feeling of being in a place where people were paying attention and someone had your back, and you could, for the first time in 4 hours, stop running the calculations. She hadn't realized how tired she was until the tiredness had somewhere to go. Tell me about Danny, she said. She didn't know why she picked that. Maybe because Danny had been there that night and was real in her memory, a shape in the ditch 20 yards from Ryder not moving, and she'd had to make the decision to focus on Ryder because Ryder was the one she could do something about, and Danny was too far, and she'd had to let that go and keep moving. She had never fully let that go. Ryder looked at her. He understood immediately what she was really asking. He's fine, he said. He's in Phoenix. He's got a daughter in college and a garden. He won't shut up about tomatoes specifically. He's doing well. She exhaled. You were worried about him, Ryder said. I didn't check on him, she said. That night, I knew he was down and I made a triage decision. You made the right call, Ryder said. I know, she said. I've told myself that for 12 years. It still doesn't sit completely flat. He made it, Ryder said. He's fine. He grows tomatoes. It's okay to let it sit flat now. She nodded once, pressed her lips together, looked at the road. And Hector, she said. Hector is in Tucson. He teaches welding at a community college 3 days a week, and he rides every weekend, and he's possibly the happiest person I know. Ryder paused. He told me once that losing the leg clarified things for him. He said it took away everything that wasn't necessary and left everything that was. Another pause. He said the night of the accident was the worst and best thing that happened to him, and he meant both parts equally. Sarah was quiet. They know about you, Ryder said. Not everything. But they know someone stopped, someone helped. They'd like to, he stopped choosing. They'd like to say thank you someday, if you'd be open to it. She absorbed this. The idea of meeting 2 men she'd seen only in a ditch on a dark highway, now whole and living tomatoes, welding daughters in college, was something her mind had to organize itself around before she could respond. Yes, she said. I'd be open to that. Ryder nodded. The flatbed truck was visible now in the distance coming north on Route 66, still several minutes away, but close enough to see. The situation was winding toward its practical resolution. The car would go on the truck, she would ride north. Her mother was waiting in a booth with 2 of Ryder's men and a slice of pie she probably hadn't touched. And yet, you said the tattoo design came in an envelope, Sarah said, 4 months after. Yes, Ryder said. There was a note, she said. I still have it. He looked at her. It's in a box in my apartment in Gallup, she said. I've moved 4 times since that night. The box comes with me every time. She paused. The note says, "This is what the oath looks like when it's drawn. The compass keeps you oriented. The word in the center is the whole promise in one. If you ever need us, use it. You'll be found." He was quiet for a moment. "You memorized it," he said. "I read it enough times," she said. "What did you think when you read it the first time?" he asked. She considered this carefully. "I thought it was the most unusual thank you note I'd ever received." She paused. "And then I thought he made it. He survived. And then I thought about what the word in the center meant, and I went and got the tattoo the same week." She looked at the compass rose. "I didn't tell anyone what it was. My friends thought it was decorative. My mother thought I was going through something." A beat. She wasn't wrong exactly. "What's the word?" he said. "In the center. For you." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean for me?" "When I put the design together," he said, "I left the word in the center blank in the note. I sent the design with the compass, but the center needle was empty. I wanted whoever wore it to put their own word there." He paused. "What did you put?" Sarah turned her arm so the tattoo was fully visible. She tilted it toward him. The light caught the small letters inside the north-pointing needle. He leaned forward and read it. He was quiet for a long time. "Home," he said. "Home," she confirmed. "Because I almost didn't stop that night. I was tired. I was coming off a 12-hour shift, and I was 4 hours from my apartment, and all I wanted was to get home." She looked at the word. "And I thought later the thing that almost stopped me from stopping was the thing I was driving toward. And what I found when I stopped was something I didn't know I was looking for." She paused. "So, home." Ryder looked at the word for a long moment. Then he turned his arm and showed her the word inside his own compass needle. She read it. "Forward," she said. "I got the tattoo a week after I woke up in that culvert," he said. "Before I knew who you were. Before I'd done anything except survive." He looked at the word. "I'd spent 14 months since Ellen died not moving. After that night, I started moving again. Forward was the only direction I had left that meant anything." She looked at his word. He looked at hers. "Forward and home," she said. "Different directions," he said. "Maybe," she said. Or maybe she stopped, not because she didn't know how to finish the sentence, because she wasn't sure yet whether she was ready to finish it out loud. He didn't push. That was, she thought, one of the things she'd gotten from the note and the 12 years and the tattoo and all of it, the knowledge that this was a man who didn't push, who said the thing clearly and then let it land in its own time, who understood that some decisions needed space to become themselves. The flatbed pulled to a stop in front of her car. The driver climbed out, a compact, efficient man in his 40s with the permanent grease line under his fingernails of someone who worked on engines for a living. He looked at the Civic and then at the assembled group and processed the scene with the practiced equanimity of a man who worked with this chapter regularly and had learned to simply focus on the car. "Silver Civic," he said to Ryder. "Belt." "She thinks serpentine," Ryder said. The man, his name was apparently Sal Ryder, used it once in passing, walked around the car with the quick expert scan of someone who'd seen 1,000 roadside situations. He crouched briefly at the front, stood, checked under the hood for 15 seconds, stood again. "Belt's fine," Sal said. "It's the tensioner. It's been going for a while. I can see the wear pattern. The belt slipped because the tensioner's loose, not because anything's broken. Another 100 miles and it would have been a different story, but right now," he looked at Sarah, "right now it'll run. I'd take it easy on the highway, keep it under 60, get it into a shop inside a week, but you can drive it." Sarah stared at him. "I could have driven it this whole time. Not with a loose tensioner on a 100-mile stretch of highway. I wouldn't have," Sal said with the reasonableness of a man who appreciated the distinction. "You made the right call stopping. You just didn't need the flatbed." She turned to Ryder. "Your car works," he said with the expression of a man who was working hard not to find this funny and not entirely succeeding. "Your network mobilized 12 motorcycles and a flatbed truck," she said, "for a loose tensioner." "We mobilized 12 motorcycles and a flatbed truck for you," he said. "The tensioner is a detail." She looked at the assembled men. Some of them had clearly overheard this exchange. Webb was looking at the sky with the serene intentionality of a man pretending he wasn't listening. Carlos had his hand over his mouth. "This is the most expensive loose tensioner in the history of Route 66, Sarah said. Carlos lost the battle with his hand. The laugh escaped. It was brief, but it was genuine, and it caught two of the other riders snorted, and then a third, and then the sound of a dozen men letting go of several hours of sustained alertness washed over the road in a warm, very human wave. Sarah watched them laugh. She looked at Ryder, who was not laughing, but whose eyes had gone warm in a way that changed the whole register of his face. "This is your network," she said. All of this, he said. "They came for a stranger." "They came for you," he said. "There's a difference. I told you 12 years ago, I told them what the tattoo meant, and I told them if they ever saw it, treat that person like family." They all knew, every one of them. He looked at the group. Not one of them hesitated when I sent the call. She looked at the men on the road, different ages, different faces, different life stories converging on a cracked highway in northern Arizona for reasons that traced back to a night they hadn't been part of, and a woman they'd never met. "Why?" she asked, and she was asking a real question, not rhetorically, not to make a point. She genuinely wanted to understand the mechanism. Why does a call from one man move all of these people? Ryder thought about this with the seriousness of someone who had asked himself the same question in different forms over many years. "Because they have all got a night," he said finally. "Every one of them. Some night on some road where it could have gone the other way, and it didn't. Maybe someone stopped. Maybe someone didn't, and they're still carrying that. When I told them the story, the shape of it, not the details, they recognized it. Because they'd been in a version of it." He paused. "And when I said there was a woman out there who was the reason I was still riding, they filed it somewhere deep, and they didn't forget." He looked at her. "People don't forget the stories that explain why the alive people are still alive." Sarah looked at the tattoo on her arm. "I just stopped," she said again. The same sentence, but this time it came out differently. Not defensive, not dismissive, more like someone saying the thing that has always been true and finally hearing what it actually means. "I know," Ryder said. "That's the whole story." Sal had the car running, idling, smooth. He came back around to where they were standing. "Tension or a hold. Like I said, take it easy. Get it looked at." He looked at Ryder. "You want an escort to Flagstaff?" Ryder looked at Sarah. She looked at the road north. She thought about her mother in the diner booth, the crossword magazine, the two flat hands on the Formica table, the apple pie Sarah hadn't eaten. She thought about 1,700 miles of road that Maggie Whitmore had driven alone to come see her, stopping at the same diner every time out of habit today, and the road being what it was. She thought about Ryder's word on his arm. Forward. She thought about her own. "Yes," she said. "Escort to Flagstaff." Ryder looked at Sal. "Flagstaff." Sal nodded and began the business of getting the flatbed repositioned, which was unnecessary now, but which he seemed to feel it was part of the job, regardless. Ryder looked at Sarah. "You'll ride in the car. We'll form up around you." "Around me?" she said. "Standard formation," he said. "Two ahead, two beside, two behind." "For a loose tensioner," she said. "For you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something settled in her, not softened, not surrendered, but settled, like the last piece of something clicking into place after a very long search. "Okay," she said. "One condition." "Name it," he said. "When we get to the diner," she said, "I'm paying for my own coffee." He looked at her. "Non-negotiable," she said. Something crossed his face, that almost smile she'd been seeing in fragments all afternoon, finally breaking fully through. It changed him. It made him look like the person he probably was when he wasn't being careful, and she thought, seeing it, that it was a good face. A real face. The kind that meant something. "Deal," he said. She got in the car. She adjusted the mirror. She checked the road ahead. She put her hands on the wheel and held it at 10 and 2 and let out the breath she'd been managing in careful, controlled increments for the past 4 hours. And it came out long and shaky and real, the way a real breath comes out when you finally stop performing. Calm, and let the body do what it was waiting to do. Nobody saw it. The windows were up. She sat with it for 3 seconds. Then she pulled herself together because she was Sarah Whitmore, and she had been pulling herself together for 42 years, and she knew how long it took, and she knew it was always worth doing. She looked in the rearview mirror, 12 motorcycles forming up behind her. She looked in the side mirror, 2 bikes pulling ahead. She looked at the tattoo on her left arm where it rested on the door. Home. She put the car in drive. She drove north on Route 66 with 12 motorcycles around her and the afternoon sun coming through the windshield at a low angle, that made everything look gilded and slightly unreal, and she kept the speedometer at 55 the way Sal had told her, and she held the wheel at 10 and 2, and she did not cry. She had not cried on that highway 12 years ago. She had not cried when the envelope arrived 4 months later. She had not cried when she sat in the tattoo chair and watched the compass rose take shape on her forearm. She was not going to cry now alone in a car on Route 66 with two Hells Angels bikes visible in her rearview mirror, keeping perfect pace 40 feet behind her. She was, however, doing something in the vicinity of crying, which was breathing very carefully through her nose and keeping her eyes wide open so the liquid that had gathered at the lower rims of both eyelids would not make the trip down her face. She was a professional. She drove. The radio came on automatically when she started the engine, some country station out of Kingman she'd found yesterday and not changed. A man with a worn voice was singing about coming home after a long time gone, which was either a cosmic joke or the universe being extremely literal, and she reached over and turned the volume up instead of down because some moments deserved a soundtrack even when they were accidental. In her left side mirror, two bikes, in the right two more, two ahead visible in the distance keeping the pace. Behind her in the rear view, the rest of the formation, and at the center of it, distinguishable by the particular way he held himself on the bike, straight-backed, both hands easy on the bars, riding the way people ride. When they have been doing it so long, it has become a form of thinking, Ryder Callahan. She watched him in the mirror more than she should have for someone focused on the road. She thought about what he'd said. Forward. She thought about what she'd said. Home. She thought about 12 years of roads and the way a person could carry something in their body without ever quite naming what it was, the way you could think you'd made peace with a thing and discover on a Tuesday afternoon in Arizona that the peace had only been patience. Her phone buzzed at the cup holder. She glanced at it. Her mother's name on the screen. She picked it up. Mom, I'm driving. I know you're driving, Maggie said. Garrett told me you left. I just want to know how far out you are. 40 minutes maybe. I'm keeping it slow. Good. A pause. How are you, Dan? I'm fine. Sarah Ann, she exhaled. I'm working through some things. In the car, alone. The formation around me makes it feel less alone. Maggie was quiet for a moment. He told you everything, she said. Ryder. Most of it? The parts he knew how to say. Good. Another pause, and then in the particular tone her mother used when she was going to say something she'd been holding for a while. I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen before you respond. Mom. Listen, Maggie said with the quiet finality of someone who had been practicing this sentence in a diner booth for the last 2 hours. I have known since you were 19 years old that you were the kind of person who stops, who pulls over, who stays. I watched you do it your whole life for strangers, for patients, for anyone who needed it, and I have been proud of you for it every single time. She paused. But I've also watched you forget to apply that same principle to yourself. You stop for everyone else, and then you get back in the V and you drive home alone, and you don't tell anyone what it cost you. Sarah looked at the road ahead. That night on the highway, Maggie said, you never told me the whole story. No, Sarah said. Why? She thought about it honestly. Because I didn't want you to worry about something that was already over. And because she stopped. Because it was mine. The way some things are just yours. I know, Maggie said. I understand that. I've had things that were mine too. A beat. But Sarah, that man put a mark on his arm so he could find you again. He spent 12 years looking. He mobilized 12 motorcycles on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it, something that had been building since she'd looked across a diner booth at a man who stopped because an old woman said her daughter's name. That's not nothing. That's not a story you keep in a box with an envelope and don't tell anyone. I know, Mom. Do you? The road curved gently north. In the mirror, the formation stayed perfect. I'm starting to, Sarah said. Maggie was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, good, come back safe. Garrett says the coffee is still hot. Garrett's been there the whole time. He and Lou both. They're very large and they take up a lot of space, but they haven't complained once. And Lou let me beat him at the crossword without making it obvious he was letting me, which I appreciated. He might actually be bad at crosswords, Mom. He's not, Maggie said with certainty. He knew the answer to 19 across before I finished reading the clue. A pause. I liked him. I like all of them. They're good men. Yeah, Sarah said. They are. She hung up. The phone went back in the cup holder, and she held the wheel and watched the road and let the music play and drove north with the weight of the last 4 hours settling into something she could carry without white-knuckling it, which was different from the weight being gone, but which was its own kind of progress. Ahead of her, the two lead bikes tapped their brakes once a signal she'd learned that something required attention. She sat up straighter. Then she saw it. Two vehicles on the shoulder of the road a quarter mile ahead, parked on the right side facing north. An old Chevy pickup and a dark blue sedan. Her hands tightened on the wheel. In the rearview mirror, she watched the formation react without a word being spoken. The spacing changed, the two rear bikes moved wider. A gap opened on the left side of her car. Ryder's bike was suddenly alongside her passenger side, close enough that she could see him clearly through the window. He looked at the vehicles ahead. He looked at her car. He held up one hand flat palm down. Stay steady. Keep driving. She kept driving. The two vehicles on the shoulder did not move. As she got closer, she could see that the Chevy was empty. The sedan had someone in the driver's seat, not moving, both hands visible on the wheel. She passed them at 55 miles per hour with 12 motorcycles around her, and she looked straight ahead and did not slow down and did not give them the satisfaction of any reaction at all. In the rearview mirror, she watched the vehicles recede. They didn't follow. Ryder's bike held position alongside her for another 30 seconds, then eased back into the formation. The rear bikes tightened again. The gap closed. She realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out. Her phone buzzed, a number she didn't have saved, but with an Arizona area code. She picked it up. Ms. Whitmore? Ryder's voice. He was on his phone while riding, which she suspected was a habit she wasn't going to successfully argue him out of right now. Those were the same vehicles. I know, she said. They were watching us pass. I know that too. You didn't react, he said. Reacting was what they wanted, she said. I drove. A pause. Yeah, he said. And in the single syllable, she could hear something, not surprise exactly. More like the specific quality of recognition when you encounter someone doing the thing you would have done. Are they going to follow? She asked. No, he said. They're not going to follow, but they're going to report back. He paused. There's a conversation I'm going to need to have in the next 24 hours that I've been putting off for 6 weeks. Today accelerated the timeline. Because of me, she said. Not with guilt, just factually. Because of the situation, he said. Not because of you. Don't carry that. I'm not carrying it, she said. I'm just noting it. Note it and set it down, he said. She almost smiled. Bambetten, is that how you handle things? Post them and set them on. I'm working on it, he said. I've been working on it for 12 years. How's it going? A beat. Better than it was, he said. Worse than I'd like. Another beat. Drive. We're almost there. She drove. The painted spur appeared on the left, and the parking lot that had been half empty when Maggie had pulled in 5 hours ago was now packed a dozen motorcycles in an organized row. Sal's flatbed parked at the far edge. 3 personal vehicles clustered near the entrance. Light came from every window. Sarah pulled into the lot and cut the engine. She sat in the car for 10 seconds. Just 10. Then she got out. The evening air was cooler than the car, or felt like it, the desert doing its dramatic temperature drop as the sun went past a certain angle. She stood beside her car and looked at the diner and breathed. The formation had pulled in around her. Engines cutting one by one, men dismounting. The organized dissolution of a group that had been tightly coordinated for 2 hours now moving into the easier, looser mode of people who'd done what they came to do. Ryder came off his bike and walked toward her. He stopped at arm's length. Ready, he said. No, she said, but I'm going in anyway. That's usually how it works, he said. She looked at him. Will you? She stopped. Will I what? Walk in with me, she said. Not, I don't mean, I know what you mean, he said. Yes. They walked in together. The bell above the door announced them in the same way it announced everyone the small domestic sound of a diner door doing its diner door thing, and the room that had gone silent 5 hours ago. When 6 men in black vests walked in, went briefly completely quiet again. And then from the corner booth, Maggie Whitmore said, there she is. Not loud, not dramatic, Just the voice of a woman who had been waiting and was done waiting, which was its own kind of declaration. Sarah crossed the room. She slid into the booth across from her mother, and Maggie looked at her, all of her, the way mothers look when they're doing the full inventory, checking for damage, cataloging what the last several hours had done, and Sarah held still and let her look. "You're okay," Maggie said. "I'm okay," Sarah said. "Really okay or?" "Really okay, Mom." Maggie reached across the table and covered Sarah's hands with both of hers. Her hands were warm and dry and familiar in the way that almost nothing else in the world was familiar. And Sarah turned her palms up and held on the same gesture she'd watched the couple near the register make 5 hours ago, when the motorcycles first came in, and she understood now what that gesture meant. Not fear, not comfort exactly, but the basic human act of making contact with something real when the world had gotten temporarily too large. "I saved you some pie," Maggie said. Sarah laughed. It came out slightly wet at the edges, but it was a real laugh. "Of course you did," she said. "Apple," Maggie said. "Darlene kept it in the back for me." "Very good woman, Darlene." Darlene, who was behind the counter pretending to wipe down the coffee machine, looked up at the sound of her name and then looked immediately back at the coffee machine with the expression of someone who had lived through an extraordinary Tuesday and was choosing to process it through the medium of extremely clean appliances. Garrett and Lou, who had been sitting on either end of the booth like large, watchful bookends, extracted themselves with the tactful efficiency of men who understood their role had shifted. Garrett paused at the edge of the booth. He looked at Sarah. "Glad you're safe," he said. "Uncomplicated. Genuine." "Thank you for staying with her," Sarah said. "She didn't need much staying with," Garrett said. He glanced at Maggie with something that was clearly respect, and Maggie received it with the gracious composure of someone entirely accustomed to being respected. Then he moved toward the counter where several of the other riders had colonized 3 stools and were engaged in the serious business of ordering food. Ryder stood at the end of the booth. He looked at the 2 women, the mother and the daughter, hands still interlocked across the table, and something moved through his face that he made no effort to manage. "Sit down," Maggie said without looking at him. He looked at her. "There's room," she said, "and you look like you haven't eaten either." He sat. Darlene appeared at the table with the coffee pot and 3 cups in the particular expression of someone who had decided that this evening was going to be the story she told for the rest of her life and was therefore committed to remembering every detail. "Coffee," she said. "Please," all 3 of them said simultaneously. And Darlene poured with a steady hand and withdrew without a word, which was exactly the right thing to do. The diner around them had returned to its low ambient noise riders at the counter, the refrigeration unit cycling a truck on the highway outside. The younger couple who'd been sharing fries by the window earlier had been replaced by a family with 2 small children, oblivious to history coloring on paper placemats. The trucker who'd been at the counter when the day started had been replaced by a different trucker who had no idea that the corner booth had been the center of something significant all afternoon, and who was focused entirely on his meatloaf. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business. Maggie looked at Ryder. She had been looking at him on and off for 5 hours, and she had not finished looking at him, and he held her gaze steadily the way he'd held it the first time, without flinching from whatever she was finding. "You were going to tell her everything," Maggie said. "On the highway." "I told her what I could," Ryder said. "What's left?" Maggie said. Sarah looked at her mother. "Mom, it's a fair question," Ryder said. "Oh, but He looked at his coffee, then at Maggie, then at Sarah. "The part I didn't say on the highway. The reason I've been riding hard for 12 years and not quite letting myself stop." The table went very quiet. "Ellen," he said. His wife's name. He said it with the careful, deliberate quality of someone who has practiced saying a name until they can do it without the word breaking in half. Ellen was the kind of person who made everything she touched more alive, not in a loud way, in a quiet, fundamental way, like the difference between a room with a window and a room without one. He paused. "When she died, I stopped being able to see the point of things I'd always taken for granted. The chapter, the road, the work." He looked at his hands. "I kept doing all of it because stopping would have meant making a decision, and I wasn't ready to make decisions. So I rode fast, and I rode a lot, and I stopped being careful." Maggie was watching him. "And then I went into a ditch," he said. "And when I came out of it, because someone stopped and made sure I came out of it, something had shifted. I couldn't explain it. I still can't explain it fully. He looked at Sarah. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It wasn't that anything was resolved. It was more like being pulled out of a ditch by a stranger who doesn't ask for anything in return, puts a specific kind of question in front of you. It asks, what do you do with the extra time? Sarah held his gaze. I've been answering that question for 12 years, he said. The chapter, the network, the people we look out for, I put more into all of it. Because someone demonstrated on a dark highway that the showing up was the thing. The being present was the thing. He paused. I owed you more than a tattoo design in an envelope. I should have found a way to tell you that earlier. I should have been less, he stopped. I should have been less proud about what it meant to ask for something. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You didn't ask, she said. You offered. Same thing for me, he said. It's not the same thing, she said. Asking means you need something. Offering means you have something to give. She held his gaze. You had something to give. You gave it. She looked at the tattoo. I've had it on my arm for 12 years, and every time someone asked about it, I changed the subject because it was mine, and it meant something too specific to translate into a conversation with someone who hadn't been there. She paused. But I never once looked at it and thought you owed me more than what you sent. He was quiet. You gave me the promise, she said. That was enough. And today, he said, today was the road making good on it, she said. That's different from owing. Maggie, who had been listening with the focused attention of a woman auditing something important, set both hands flat on the table in the gesture Sarah recognized as her mother reaching a conclusion. All right, Maggie said. Both of them looked at her. All right, she said again. You've both been carrying this separately for 12 years, and you've both done it with remarkable dignity, and it's been very impressive. And now you're both going to stop. She looked at Ryder. You're going to stop riding around Arizona trying to pay a debt that's already been acknowledged. She looked at Sarah. And you're going to stop keeping things in boxes that belong in conversations. She picked up her coffee cup. This is a diner. We're all sitting here. This is where conversations happen. Ryder looked at Maggie Whitmore, and his expression did something she would not have expected. It went briefly and entirely soft. Not weak, soft. The specific quality of softness that appears in strong people when something catches them off guard in a way they didn't defend against. Yes, ma'am, he said. Sarah looked at her mother. You've been planning that speech since Flagstaff. I've been planning that speech since the moment this man walked out of a diner and left me with two very large men in a crossword puzzle. Maggie said. I had 5 hours. From the counter, Lou said without turning around. She really did have 5 hours. She was very focused. You weren't supposed to be listening, Maggie said. You said it loud enough for the whole room, Lou said also without turning around. Garrett next to him was staring straight at his coffee with the expression of a man who knew that eye contact would destroy him. The family with the small children at the window table, the older child, who was maybe 7, had turned around in her seat at some point during the last few minutes and was watching the corner booth with the candid, unguarded interest that children brought to things they could tell were important without knowing why. Her mother gently turned her back toward her coloring, and the child went reluctantly. Sarah looked at the window. She looked at the road outside the highway going north and south, the last of the day's light on the asphalt. She looked at Ryder. Where do you go from here? She asked. After tonight, what's next for you? He thought about it. I have to deal with the situation that showed itself today. The two vehicles, the territory question, it needs to go forward, not sideways. He paused. And I need to go see Danny. I told him I'd found you. He's going to want to know you're okay. Another pause. Hector, too. I said you were open to meeting them. I want to make that happen. Tomatoes and welding, she said. Tomatoes and welding, he confirmed. She turned her coffee cup. I'm in Gallup until December. After that, I'm not sure. I've been looking at a position in Sedona Home Care, better caseload. I haven't decided. Sedona is closer to Flagstaff than Gallup is, Ryder said. He said it as information, just information. I'm aware of that, Sarah said. Also just information. Maggie looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone exercising extraordinary self-control. The situation today, Sarah said. The people who were watching. Is it going to stay contained or does it escalate? Can't tell you with certainty, Ryder said. But I've dealt with variations of it before. The network is solid. The message today was clear. He looked at her. And no one on that road today was anything less than exactly what I'd need them to be. Carlos, she said. Carlos specifically, Ryder said. He did everything right. He stopped, she said. Ryder looked at her. He recognized the echo. Yeah, he said. He stopped. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the diner, the riders at the counter, Darlene doing her careful rounds, the family with the small children, the new trucker, the highway outside, the last light failing, and she thought that she had been in 100 diners in her life, on 100 different roads, and she had never been in one that felt quite like this, one felt right now, which was a word she was still not quite ready to say out loud, but which lived adjacent to the word on the inside of her forearm. I want to ask you something, she said to Ryder, and I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is complicated. All right, he said. These 12 years, she said. The debt you've been carrying, the looking, the riding. She held his gaze. Was it really just about the debt? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Maggie, who had been a still and attentive presence for the last 20 minutes, set down her cup with the particular care of a woman giving the moment all the room it needed. No, Ryder said. Sarah waited. It started as a debt, he said. That was real. I owed you something and I knew it and I wanted to pay it. That's true. He looked at his coffee. But somewhere in the looking, the years of it, the almost finding you and missing by 2 weeks, the carrying the story in one direction, while you were carrying it in another somewhere in that, it became something else. He looked up. Not the debt, something more like needing to know you were okay. Needing to know the woman who pulled me out of a ditch was still in the world, still stopping for people who needed it. He paused. Not because I was owed that, because it mattered that someone like you was still out there. The table was very quiet. That's not a small thing to say, Sarah said. No, he agreed. It's not. You don't know me, she said. Not really. You know what I did one night. I know what you did one night, he said. And I know that what a person does on a dark highway when nobody's watching is exactly who they are. He held her gaze. I know who you are. She looked at him. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway. The refrigeration unit cycled. Darlene passed by with the coffee pot and refilled all 3 cups with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood that some moments required coffee and nothing else. I don't know what this is, Sarah said. Quiet, direct. The tone she used when she was being as honest as she knew how to be. What this is between 2 people who shared one night 12 years ago and have been carrying it separately ever since. I don't have a word for it yet. Neither do I, Ryder said. That doesn't bother you. Everything worth having starts without a word for it, he said. The word comes later. She absorbed this. Forward, she said. Home, he said. Maggie picked up her fork and cut into the slice of apple pie she had been guarding for the last 4 hours and took a precise, unhurried bite with the expression of a woman who had exactly the evening she'd been hoping for and was not going to pretend otherwise. Good pie, she said. Darlene, this is excellent pie. From behind the counter, Darlene said, Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, in the voice of someone who had fully committed to the role the evening had given her and intended to see it through. Lou swiveled on his stool and looked at the slice of pie in front of Maggie and then looked at Garrett and said, Did we ever get pie? No, Garrett said. Why not? Because you didn't ask. Lou looked at Darlene. Could we? I'll bring the whole pie, Darlene said, already moving. The corner of Ryder's mouth moved in the direction of that smile again. The real one, the one that lived close to the surface, and Sarah saw it and looked back at her coffee and pressed 2 fingers flat against the tattoo on her forearm and felt for the first time in a very long time that the compass was pointing somewhere specific. Not away from anything, towards something. The diner went on around them, ordinary and warm, and lit from within the smell of coffee and sugar and the particular domestic constancy of a place that had been feeding travelers for decades. And outside, the highway ran north and south through the high Arizona desert. And somewhere on it, 2 vehicles were driving somewhere with a story they hadn't expected to bring back. And 12 motorcycles sat in a parking lot belonging to men who had done exactly what they were asked to do without hesitation, and a silver Honda Civic with a loose tensioner was parked near the door, waiting to carry a woman the last 50 miles of a journey that had started without knowing it 12 years ago on a dark highway when she saw a hand above the edge of a ditch and pulled over before she'd finished deciding to. Ryder's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something shifted in his face, not alarm. Closer to resolution, the face of a man who has received information he was expecting and has already begun to act on it. "I have to step outside for a minute," he said. Sarah looked at him. "It's the situation," he said. "The people from the road. They've made contact through a third party." He held her gaze. "It's manageable, but I need to take it." "Go," she said. He looked at her for one moment longer. Then he got up from the booth and walked toward the door, and as he passed the counter, he touched Webb's shoulder. Once 2 fingers brief, and Webb straightened and followed, and the door opened and closed, and they were outside in the lot where the bikes were. Sarah looked at the empty seat across from her. Then she looked at her mother. Maggie was watching her with the specific expression level warm, not pushing of a woman who had been looking at her daughter for 42 years and had learned precisely when to wait. "Mom," Sarah said. "I know," Maggie said. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Yes, you do," Maggie said. "You've always known what you were doing. You just don't always know what to call it while you're doing it." She picked up her coffee. "The word comes later. Someone very smart said that recently." Sarah looked at her. "You were listening." "I'm always listening," Maggie said. "I'm your mother." Outside, through the window, Sarah could see Ryder in the parking lot, phone to his ear, Webb beside him. His posture was the forward-weighted stance of a man handling something with intent. Not distress, intent. The posture of someone who knew exactly what needed to happen next and was making it happen. She watched him for a moment. Then she looked at the tattoo on her arm, the compass, the needle. The small word she'd chosen 12 years ago in a tattoo chair in New Mexico with her heart doing something she hadn't had a name for. Home. She looked at the door. She looked at her mother. "I'll be back in a minute," she said. Maggie smiled. Not the composed, managed smile she deployed in public, but the real one, the full one. The one that looked exactly like the smile Sarah had been seeing since before she could remember. "Take your time," she said. Sarah got up. She crossed the diner, past the riders at the counter, past Darlene with her coffee pot, past the family with the small children, where the 7-year-old had turned around again and was watching with frank curiosity, and she pushed through the door into the cooling Arizona evening. Ryder heard her and turned. He was still on the phone. He looked at her, a question in his expression, and she shook her head slightly, not interrupting, just here. He held her gaze for a second. Then he turned back to the call and kept talking low and direct and certain. And she stood in the parking lot in the early dark with the desert air around her and the sound of his voice carrying the shape of the conversation without the words, and she waited, and it felt nothing like the waiting she'd done on a highway for 4 hours. It felt like something else entirely, something that needed a word she didn't have yet. Ryder finished the call in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Sarah counted without meaning to the way you count things when you're standing still and your mind needs something to do with itself. He lowered the phone and looked at it for a moment before he pocketed it. Then he looked at her. "Resolved?" she asked. "Moving toward it," he said. "The third party who made contact, his name is Birch. He runs a legitimate operation out of Flagstaff. He's been caught between 2 situations he didn't choose. He wants out from the middle. He's willing to talk." He paused. "If I meet with him tomorrow morning, there's a path through this that doesn't require the escalation the other side is hoping for. And if the meeting goes wrong, it won't," he said, not with arrogance, with the particular certainty of a man who has correctly read enough rooms to trust his own reading. Birch is scared, not aggressive. Scared men who reach out want resolution. They don't want more trouble. She looked at him. "You've done this before." "Version of it. Many times." He held her pause. "This is what the network is for. Not the dramatic moments, those are rare. Mostly it's this, reading the situation, finding the path that lets everyone keep their dignity and walk away." He paused. "It's less cinematic than people imagine." "Most things are," she said. He looked at the parking lot at the row of bikes. Then he looked at her standing in the evening air with the diner light behind her and the desert dark gathering at the edges of the lot, and he said, "Why did you come out?" She had been asking herself the same thing for the 4 minutes and 12 seconds she'd been standing there. The honest answer was still assembling itself. "Because you were out here," she said, "and I've spent enough time today on the other side of glass watching things happen. He was quiet. "I'm not good at waiting," she said. "I told my mother I was patient once and she laughed for about 30 seconds straight." "Maggie seems like someone who laughs accurately," he said. "She does," Sarah said. "It's a terrible quality in a mother." He did the thing, the almost smile, the real one, breaking through again. She was starting to map it. It came when something surprised him into warmth. It came fast and went quickly, like it was still learning it was allowed. "The call," she said. "Birch. He reached out tonight specifically." "Yes?" "Because of what happened on Route 66 today." "Yes." 12 motorcycles, she said. 12 motorcycles, he confirmed. She looked at the line of bikes in the lot. They changed the calculation. "They demonstrated that the network holds," he said, "that a mobilization call gets answered fast from multiple chapters without question. That's information that matters to people who were considering whether to push." He looked at the bikes too. They weren't expecting 12. Nobody expects 12 on a Tuesday afternoon. "Carlos," she said. "Carlos was already close," Ryder said. "But Webb was 40 minutes out. Garrett was 35. The others were further." He paused. "They all moved when I called." "Because you asked." "Because they trust that when I call it matters," he said. "That's 12 years of showing up, of being the person who answers when it's inconvenient, who rides when conditions are bad, who keeps the word he gives." He looked at her. "Trust isn't built in the dramatic moments. It's built in the 100 small moments before the dramatic one." She thought about her patients. The old woman in Gallup who she visited every Tuesday and Thursday, who had stopped eating well until Sarah started sitting down for 5 minutes with a cup of tea before she left and now ate. The man after his hip replacement who refused to do his exercises until Sarah started doing them alongside him on her feet in his living room at 7 in the morning and now walked to his mailbox alone. The husband whose wife was dying and who never said anything about it directly, but who always made sure to have the coffee ready when Sarah arrived, as though the routine itself was the thing keeping him functional. Trust built in small moments. Presence maintained without spectacle. "I do that too," she said. "The same thing, different context." "I know," he said. "How do you know you found out I was a nurse, but you don't know the details of—" "Because of one night 12 years ago," he said. "The way you worked, the way you thought, the decisions you made under pressure without anyone to consult." He held her gaze. "You don't learn that in a classroom. You learn it in 1,000 small moments with people who needed you when you were tired and showed up anyway." She looked at the ground for a moment, then back at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Same terms as before. Honest answer, even if it's complicated." "Go ahead," she said. "Sedona," he said. "The position you mentioned, the one you haven't decided about." She waited. "Is the not deciding because you're genuinely unsure about the job," he said, "or because you've been not deciding about a lot of things and the job is just the most recent thing in the stack?" She stared at him. "That's a very direct question," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She looked at the highway. A truck went past heading north, its lights sweeping briefly across the lot and then gone. "Both," she said. "The job is good. The caseload is better. The location is, it would be an upgrade in most ways." She paused. "But I've been moving every 2 to 3 years for 15 years, and I keep telling myself it's because better opportunities come up, and that's true, but it's not the whole truth." She paused again. "The whole truth is that I don't fully unpack anywhere. I keep the box with the envelope. I don't put things on the walls." "Why?" he said. "Because walls mean you're staying," she said. "And staying means you're committed to a particular version of your life. And I've been—" She stopped. Started again. "I think I've been waiting to know what the right version looked like before I committed to any version." He was quiet for a moment. "And now," he said. She looked at him, standing in the parking lot of the Painted Spur Diner on Route 89 in northern Arizona, gray-haired and weathered and holding her gaze with the steady, unhurried attention of a man who had learned to wait for things that mattered. And she thought about the compass on her arm and the word inside it and the 12 years of driving and the box that came with her every time she moved. "And now I think," she said slowly, "that I might put some things on the walls." He held her gaze. "Sedona," he said. "Sedona," she said. Neither of them said anything else about it. They didn't need to. The word sat between them with its meaning intact, and they both knew what it meant, and they let it be what it was. Then the diner door opened behind her. "Sarah," her mother's voice, not urgent, just present. "There's someone on the phone for you." Sarah turned. Maggie was standing in the doorway holding Sarah's cell phone. She must have come back to the booth to get it with the expression of someone who has screened a call and determined it required immediate attention. "Who is it?" Sarah said. "He says his name is Danny," Maggie said. "He says Ryder texted him that you were found and he's been waiting for 2 hours to call and he finally couldn't wait anymore." Sarah went still. Danny. The man she'd seen in the ditch 20 yards from Ryder 12 years ago. The shape she'd had to make a decision about and keep moving. 3 broken arm bones and a helmet cracked hard enough to rattle the brain inside it, and she had kept moving and she had lived with that choice every day since. And now he was on the phone and he'd been waiting 2 hours because he didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening. She looked at Ryder. He had his phone out. He was looking at it with an expression that was briefly entirely unguarded. "I texted him from the road," he said. "I should have warned you." "Don't apologize for it," she said. She crossed to her mother and took the phone. She held it to her ear. "Danny," she said. The voice that came back was warm and a little rough and completely alive. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I told Ryder this was a bad idea calling you out of nowhere. He said you'd want to hear from me." A pause. "I hope he was right." "He was right," she said, a beat. "Then, I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 12 years. He laughed a short, self-aware sound. "I had a whole speech. I practiced it. My wife told me to just be honest and throw the speech out." "Your wife sounds smart," Sarah said. "She's smarter than me by a significant margin," Danny said. "She's been telling me that for 20 years and she's right every time." Another pause. I wanted you to know that I'm okay. That we're all okay. That whatever you did that night, I know I wasn't the one you were focused on. I know you had to make a call, and I just wanted to say that I'm glad you made the call you made because it meant Ryder came back, and Ryder coming back has meant a lot to a lot of people over the last 12 years. He paused, including me. She was quiet for a moment, breathing carefully. "Are you gardening?" she said. "Ryder told me you garden." Danny laughed, a real one, surprised and warm. "Tomatoes," he said. "Best tomatoes in Maricopa County, and I will fight anyone who says different." "That's a very specific claim," she said. "It's a very defensible claim," he said. "My neighbor has been trying to beat me for 4 years, and every year he comes up short, and every year I bring him a basket of mine, and we both know what it means, and neither of us says it out loud." She laughed. It came out full and genuine and surprised her by doing so. "That's one of the best things I've heard all day," she said, "and this has been a significant day. Ryder told me," Danny said, "Road 66, the whole network." His voice went quieter. "That's what should have happened 12 years ago. You should have had a way to reach us then. I told Ryder that when he found out who you were. He knows." "We talked about it," she said. "Good." A pause. "Ms. Whitmore, Sarah, my wife and I are in Phoenix. If you're ever coming through, we'd like to buy you dinner. That's not a polite offer. That's a standing invitation with a specific chair at our table that we are prepared to describe in detail if it helps make it real." Her eyes were doing the thing again. She looked at the sky. "I'm going to hold you to that," she said. "I hope you do," Danny said. "Give Ryder a hard time for me. He needs it occasionally." "I'll add it to my list," she said. She hung up. She stood in the doorway for a moment with the phone in her hand and her mother beside her, and the diner warm at her back and the desert dark ahead. "Okay," Maggie said. "Really okay," Sarah said. And this time she meant it without any qualifications at all. She went back inside. Ryder was standing near the end of the counter. He looked at her when she came in. She crossed to him and handed him back his text message by way of acknowledgement and said, "He told me to give you a hard time." "That sounds like Danny," Ryder said. "He said you need it occasionally." "He's not wrong," Ryder said. From the counter, Lou said without any apparent shame, "He's definitely not wrong." Garrett said, "Lou?" "I'm just agreeing," Lou said. Webb, who had come back inside at some point and was working through a slice of pie with the focused dedication of a man who had earned it, said, "Can we talk about the fact that none of this had to happen if someone had exchanged phone numbers 12 years ago?" The room went briefly very quiet. Then Carlos from the far end of the counter, where he'd been so quiet for the last 20 minutes that Sarah had half forgotten he was there, said, I mean, he's not wrong either. Ryder looked at Webb. He looked at Carlos. He looked at the assembled riders with the expression of a man who led people he had explicitly given too much latitude to. Then he looked at Sarah. They're not wrong, he said. No, she said. They're not. She held out her phone. Put your number in, she said. Not the chapter number, yours. He took the phone. He typed. He handed it back. She looked at it, saved under the name he'd typed himself, which was simply Ryder, no last name, which was exactly right, because some people occupied a category that only needed one word. That's 12 years overdue, Webb said, with the satisfaction of someone who has watched a situation of resolve and is not going to pretend he didn't notice. Webb, Ryder said. I'm just noting it, Webb said. Note it and set it down, Sarah said. Ryder looked at her. The real smile came not briefly this time, not managed back under control, just out in present, and it reached his eyes and changed his whole face, and she held it like something she'd been waiting to see properly for a very long time. You're going to use that against me, he said. Every chance I get, she said. Maggie settled back in her corner booth with her coffee, watched the exchange with the expression of a woman who had driven 1,700 miles across Arizona to see her daughter and had received considerably more than she came for and considered every mile worth it. Darlene, she said. Ma'am, Darlene said, appearing with the reflexive readiness of someone who had spent the last 6 hours becoming the most reliably present person in the room. I think we need another round of coffee, Maggie said. For everyone. Darlene looked at the riders at the counter. She looked at the corner booth. She looked at the two people standing near the end of the counter with the particular quality of two people who had found something and were still figuring out what to do with it. On it, she said, and meant it completely. The coffee came. The diner settled into the specific warmth of a place where something significant had happened and was now being absorbed. The riders talked among themselves, not about the day's events, just the ordinary conversation of people who had been in each other's company long enough to move past the reason they came together into the comfortable territory of simply being together. Someone mentioned a ride the following weekend. Someone else had a position on the best route through Sedona in summer. The conversation moved and branched and settled and rose again the way conversation did when people were at ease. Sarah sat back down across from her mother. Ryder sat at the end of the booth, the same position he'd taken before he went outside, as though the seat had kept his shape. The three of them drank coffee and the pie plates circulated, and the evening deepened outside the windows, and the highway went on in both directions, carrying its indifferent, continuous traffic. I want to tell you something, Sarah said to Ryder. He waited. That night, she said, when I was driving north after I left you in the culvert, I was about 30 miles down the road and it hit me what I'd done, what I'd been in the middle of the men who came back twice the hours in the ditch. She paused. I pulled over. He was very still. I sat on the shoulder of the highway for about 20 minutes, she said, and I shook. The way you shake when the adrenaline runs out and your body finally understands what your mind has been managing. She looked at her hands. I hadn't let myself shake while I was there because I couldn't afford to. But on the road after alone, I shook. He looked at her. I'm telling you because, she stopped, started again. I'm telling you because I've never told anyone that, and because I think you should know that the composure was real, but it was also work, that I was scared, that staying took everything I had. She met his eyes. Not because I regret it. I don't regret a single minute of it. But because I don't want you to think of me as someone who does hard things effortlessly. I'm not that. I'm someone who does hard things and then pulls over afterward and shakes for 20 minutes. He held her gaze for a long moment. That's not a weakness, he said. I know, she said. That's exactly right, he said. You held it while it needed holding. You let it out when you were somewhere safe. That's he stopped. That's how it should work. Most people don't get that right, she said. Most people haven't done what you do every day, he said. 15 years of sitting with people in the hardest moments of their lives. You know how to hold and release. Most people only know how to do one or the other. Maggie, who had been listening with the focused, quiet attention she'd maintained all evening, said, She learned the holding from me. I take full credit. Sarah looked at her mother. She did, Maggie said unapologetically. I also taught her to release, but she was a slower learner on that one. Mom, it's accurate, Maggie said. I love you, but it's accurate. Sarah looked at the ceiling, briefly, then at Ryder. She's been doing this my entire life. It seems effective, Ryder said. Don't encourage her, Sarah said. Maggie smiled into her coffee cup. The door opened. Carlos came back in. He'd stepped out at some point, and he crossed to where Ryder was sitting and leaned down and said something quietly. Ryder listened. His expression changed, not alarmed, more like something confirming. Good, Ryder said. Tell him tomorrow 9 o'clock the coffee place on Milton, not the chapter house. Neutral ground, you tell. Carlos nodded and straightened. He looked at Sarah on his way back to his stool. Birch agreed to the meet, he said, apparently deciding she had earned the update. Tomorrow morning. Fast, she said. He's been sitting on that shoulder of road for 2 hours working up the nerve to reach out, Carlos said. Once he moved fast. He paused. That's what happens when people are ready to stop. They stop fast. He went back to his stool. Sarah looked at Ryder. Tomorrow morning, she said, at Flagstaff, he said, I'll be done by noon. She held his gaze. She was aware of the specificity of what she was about to say, and she said it anyway because she was done managing everything at a careful distance. I'll be at my mother's until Thursday. She lives in Flagstaff. He absorbed this. I know, he said. She told me when I was sitting here earlier. She mentioned it without making it obvious she was mentioning it. Maggie did not look up from her coffee. Her expression was entirely neutral in the way that expressions were entirely neutral when the person behind them was working to make them so. Mom, Sarah said. I was making conversation, Maggie said. You were engineering, Sarah said. Those are sometimes the same thing, Maggie said. Also, I'm 71, and I've been in this booth for 6 hours, and I've earned some latitude. Ryder looked at the table with the expression of a man who was profoundly grateful that this woman existed. Thursday, he said to Sarah, not to the table. Thursday, she said. It was not a plan exactly, it was the shape of one. The framework before the details, the agreement before the specifics, the yes before the how and when and where. But it was real the way the word home was real on her arm, small and specific and meaning exactly what it said. An hour passed. The diner thinned. The riders began the organized departure of a group that had stayed as long as the evening needed them to and now had their own roads to take. They came by the corner booth in ones and twos, not making a ceremony of it, just present. For a moment and then moving a word to Ryder, a nod to Sarah, one or two, who looked at her directly with expressions that said what they weren't going to put into language. Webb stopped last. He stood at the end of the booth and looked at Sarah with the direct, unhurried gaze of a man who had sat with something all evening and was going to say it before he left. When Ryder called today, he said, I was in Cottonwood. That's about an hour south. I had plans, not big ones, but plans. He paused. I canceled them and I rode north, and I want you to know it was the easiest decision I made all week. He paused again. Because Ryder told us years ago what the tattoo meant, and I looked at my arm that day. I don't have your design, but I have something similar, and I thought if someone showed up for me the way you showed up for him, I would want the debt paid. I would want someone to move. He held her gaze. So we moved. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, Webb, she said. He nodded once. Take the Sedona job, he said. The drive from Sedona to Flagstaff is 25 minutes, in case that's useful information. He looked at Ryder. 25 minutes, give or take. Webb, Ryder said. Moving, Webb said, and moved. The door opened and closed, and he was gone. Sarah looked at Ryder. 25 minutes, she said. Give or take, he said. Maggie set her cup down. She looked at the two of them across the table with the comprehensive, unhurried gaze of a woman who has raised children and watched them navigate the world and has spent a lifetime knowing when to speak and when to simply witness. She had earned this moment. The 1,700 miles, the 6 hours in the booth, the crossword puzzle, and the apple pie, and the two large men, and the remarkable discovery that the world was smaller and more intentional than it appeared from inside an ordinary Tuesday. She had earned the right to watch her daughter sit across from a gray-haired man in a diner in northern Arizona, and finally, after 12 years, let the distance between them close to something that fit. I should use the restroom, Maggie announced and collected herself from the booth with the dignity of a woman making a tactical withdrawal and crossed the diner toward the back, with the serenity of someone who had absolutely nothing to apologize for. Ryder watched her go. "She's extraordinary," he said. "She's been doing this since I was 17, Sarah said. "She has a system." "What's the system?" "Announce a completely mundane reason to leave. Give the people she's leaving alone exactly the time they need. Come back when it's right." Sarah paused. "She's never once gotten the timing wrong." He looked at the table, at his coffee, at his hands, at her. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest, the one closest to his chest, the one that required a specific motion to access the one where people kept things that needed to be close and protected. He came out with something small. A coin. Old, worn, smooth at the edges, the detail on one face softened by years of handling. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it, looked. It was a challenge coin, the kind that clubs and organizations use, the kind that carried meaning specific to the group that made it. This one had a compass rose on one face, the same design as the tattoo, the same 4 points and the same modifications. On the reverse, she could see 2 words. She picked it up. She turned it over. The words on the back were "We come." "That's the promise in physical form," Ryder said. "You carry it. If you ever need us, any chapter, any situation, anything, you show that coin and the answer is always the same." He held her gaze. "Not because of the debt. The debt is paid. That's done. From here, it's because you're—" He stopped, chose the word carefully. "Because you're one of ours, if you want to be." She looked at the coin in her palm. The compass rose, the 2 words. She thought about 12 years of driving alone and boxes that didn't fully unpack, and walls without things on them, and the word on her arm that she'd chosen without fully understanding what it would take to get there. She closed her fingers around the coin. "I want to be," she said. He exhaled, quietly controlled, but she heard it. She heard what was in it. The release of something held a very long time, the particular sound of a man who has been carrying a debt and a story and a name in a face, and has finally, on a Tuesday in July, in a diner that smelled of coffee and pee and the accumulated history of 1,000 road travelers, been allowed to set it down. Not because it was resolved, because it was transformed. Debt into belonging, distance into presence. The thing he'd owed into the thing they'd built without knowing they were building it. Maggie returned from the restroom with the timing of a woman who had counted to exactly the right number, and came back to find what she'd expected to find: her daughter, with her hand closed around something small and real, and a man across the table who looked like someone who had come home to a place he hadn't known he was looking for. She slid back into the booth. She looked at both of them. She picked up her coffee. "Well," she said with the comprehensive satisfaction of 71 years of paying attention to people and being right about most of them. "Good." Outside, Route 89 carried its steady traffic north and south through the Arizona dark. The last of the motorcycles had gone from the lot. Only Ryder's bike remained, in Sarah's silver Civic with its loose tensioner and its New Mexico plates, and Maggie's road-dusty sedan pointed toward the daughter she'd been driving to see. Inside, Darlene wiped down the counter for the last time and thought about what she was going to say when people asked about her day. She was going to say it was a quiet Tuesday, because that was what you said when the truth was too large for ordinary language, and because some stories belonged to the people in them, and you respected that by holding what you'd witnessed with care. The family with the small children had gone. The trucker had gone. The ordinary world had turned over into its evening population of later travelers and long-haul drivers, and people making their way from one place to another with their own invisible cargo. In the corner booth, Maggie Whitmore finished her coffee and announced that she was ready to drive to her house in Flagstaff, and that Sarah was going to follow her and was not going to try to drive anything longer than 20 miles tonight. Sarah said that was fine. Ryder said he'd ride the same direction. Maggie looked at him with the expression of someone who had not expected that and was recalculating. Then she said, "Good. You can tell me the rest of the story on the way." "I'm not riding in your car, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I drive slow and you have a phone, and 25 miles is long enough for the parts you haven't told me." She stood and collected her purse and her crossword magazine with the efficiency of a woman who had decided the evening's remaining logistics were now her domain. "You didn't think you were getting away without the whole story, did you?" He looked at Sarah. You did warn me, he said. I warned you, she confirmed. He stood. He put his hand briefly on the table, not reaching for her hand, just on the table near it close, and then he straightened. Let's go, he said. They walked out of the painted spur diner together, Maggie first with the purposeful stride of someone who had places to be, and stories still coming to her, and then Sarah, and then Ryder, the door swinging shut behind them on the warmth and light of a place that had held an ordinary Tuesday and an extraordinary one inside the same walls. Sarah stopped at her car. She looked at the highway. She looked at the coin in her hand. She'd been holding it since he'd put it on the table, and she would hold it for a while yet. And eventually she would put it in the box with the envelope, and the box would keep coming with her everywhere she went, and the walls of wherever she landed next would have things on them. She looked at the tattoo on her forearm. Home. She looked at Ryder on his bike, already running the engine, turning over in the dark with the easy, powerful sound of something built for distance. And he looked at her, and the look between them carried everything that words were still catching up to: all the 12 years and the dark highway and the ditch and the note and the tattoo and the 4 months and the 2 weeks and the Tuesday afternoon and the coin and the 25 minutes between Sedona and Flagstaff, all of it contained in a single moment of two people looking at each other across a parking lot and knowing. She got in her car, she started the engine, she pulled out of the lot and onto Route 89, and in her rearview mirror, she watched Ryder's headlight fall into position behind her, steady and present in the dark, and ahead of her, her mother's taillights leading north, and the road opening in front of all three of them into the Arizona night. She pressed 2 fingers flat against the tattoo on her forearm resting on the door. She took them away. She put both hands on the wheel. Some debts, when they're paid, become something larger than the debt ever was. Some roads, when they're finished, reveal that what looked like an ending was the only beginning that was ever going to work. And some people, when they finally stop being strangers, discover they have never really been strangers at all. Only 2 points on the same compass, pointing different directions, waiting for the moment the needle found its north. Sarah Whitmore drove toward Flagstaff with a coin in her cup holder and a number in her phone and a word on her arm that had always been true, and the road behind her held its light steady, and the debt was paid, and the circle was closed, and every mile that came after this one was finally completely and without question hers.